Today, we're joined by Zach Ferenbaugh from the hunting public, known by some as Zinger and by the elite as Zeke. Zach is pretty humble about his skill set, but don't let that laid-back personality fool you. Over the last few years, he's been establishing himself as one of the most lethal ground hunters out there, consistently getting within bow range of mature bucks. And he's doing it all in a video format that makes for some of the most exciting hunting content you can watch on YouTube. When I talk to other hunters and we get on the subject of recalling our favorite hunts on social media, it is generally tied to this man's name. I'll leave my personal favorite in the description, and it's easily one of the most inspirational hunts that I've ever seen. This episode runs a little over 3 hours, and throughout the conversation, Zach and I dive into some very unconventional and non-traditional topics along the way. I hope you all enjoy, and let's get into the podcast. One of the things that I kind of like to do, I only have one episode posted now. I actually have 2 episodes recorded, so you're the third. But I like to ask the question as to what, in your opinion, is the most difficult habitat to hunt. And that's if all hunting pressure was the same. So let's just say each scenario receives a medium amount of just standard hunting pressure. It could be public, maybe even a managed property that's halfway hunted pretty heavily. But what habitat style that you've hunted is the most difficult in your opinion?
That's a great question. You want me to go ahead and answer that now?
Yeah, no, if you want to. We're rolling.
Well, I really like that question. It's not one that I feel like most people like want a state or like a region, and I think that habitat's a good question because it's so it can be so consistent in such a broad part of the country. But the habitat type that I've been struggling with the most recently is kind of a combination of habitat and terrain, but like kind of thinking eastern US, kind of open timber, more open timber and really hilly. But nothing but timber, like not really fields or pastures or anything, like steep and a lot of different terrain where especially you start getting into the later part of the season when the leaves are off and deer can now see and hear across big valleys where I guess comparing that to a place that's really thick, like visually, it maybe even does have the terrain still, but just has that additional visual cover for deer, like when they get in there and they can't see anything. I think that works to our advantage really well. They bury themselves in those spots, and as long as we're patient, and take our time to get into those areas and don't sound too much like a human, we can sometimes trick them just by doing something different than like the masses are doing. I think a lot of times deer kind of find hunter trends and then they just set themselves up to defeat that. Like if everybody's walking the ridgetop trail and they're being really loud, then they may just set up just off that, but to where they can watch that ridgetop trail and know exactly when people are coming in and out. The more visual cover that is between you and the deer, I think the more opportunity you have to kind of sneak in and get close. But then you put that same terrain and same, I guess, situation even where somebody's walking down the ridgetop trail, but now there's extremely open timber and there's just, ridges that are kind of facing each other. And you might be walking 300, 400, 500, 600 yards away from a deer across a valley, but it can now just pinpoint you like that. And I think that, to me, has been the hardest thing to kind of just tweak the strategy of hunting those types of areas, because you get in those thick areas and you can just be way more aggressive. You can be like, okay, this is the terrain feature that the deer are likely going to be bedding on or around, and then here's some funnels that are going to pinch them down to where we could potentially set up to bow hunt, for example, and that's going to give us this setup that's within 150 to 200 yards of a bedding area with a funnel that's going to pinch them down to a specific spot and give us this perfect opportunity. But then all of a sudden, you take that thick cover away and you know, are hunting in this open timber scenario. And I feel like I've just had to completely flip how I think about things, and also have to kind of, as much as I hate to do it, back off on the aggressive approach a little bit. Like, you have to almost be more conservative. I think that's kind of where the way I'm leaning towards, a little bit more conservative, because you just can't get as close to the bedding areas. Like, they can see so much more and hear so much more. So I guess as of right now, that's the thing that's definitely on my mind the most, as far as like trying to figure out a habitat type, I guess.
Yeah, no, I was going to agree with you that that probably would be your most difficult form of habitat. It's like
Yeah.
continuous crunchy leaves everywhere you look, and I mean you can hunt conditions that'll help with that, but for the most part you're just in open, line of sight. Like you said, they can see you across, from hillside to hillside 600 yards and pick you off left and right. So your hunting style of aggressive on the ground doesn't really play too well in that scenario unless you're walking around with a rifle, which could help. But even then, it's still difficult. It's a lot more difficult than normal. And do you struggle to find their beds in those locations? Do you feel like they can just bed everywhere? Or you're pretty good at locating them?
I guess I hear it when people say like they can bed anywhere, and I do agree with that to a degree. Um, like, you can find beds in tons of different places in those types of settings. I think that the thing though that maybe, I guess, would help to confirm and kind of clarify like what I'm thinking of specifically is, I feel that like me and my buddies that hunt these types of areas, like we're looking at terrain features where they often bed. We're not necessarily saying that's where the mature buck beds all the time. So there might be, in a between roads. Let's just, I often refer to like a roadblock. Within that roadblock, there might be 50, 100 different, potential bedding points. It might be 500 of them. It can vary a lot, but typically it seems like the deer are going to bed where there's just barely a little bit of a flat spot, especially close to where it's really steep. So, like, for example, if you have like a high knob or a spiny ridge, but then there's like a secondary finger that comes off of that that's a little bit more gradual, or even better yet, it seems like a series of those finger ridges that are either up high. I guess let's put it this way. It doesn't necessarily seem to me that it has to be up high or down low or anywhere in between. It's just like wherever that flat spot kind of creates the best opportunity for them to lay there and then have other things to their advantage. And like every one of those 50 to 500 spots may have subtle variation in what gives them an advantage. Like, one might be a little bit better visually. One might be better for morning thermals pulling up. One might be better for, moving down into the bottom as thermals pull down. And I think that that's kind of where this, like, they can bed anywhere kind of plays into that. I think maybe more than like where exactly their body is, it's more like how do you predict those conditions that are going to even just possibly put the advantage in your favor. Because I think like what you're proving with your research is like it doesn't always even necessarily line up with these theories that we come up with. But man, even if it gives you that much confidence, or gives you like a 1% increase in odds of seeing one that day, I'll take that. Just knowing how frustrating it can be. It's like anything to put the odds in your favor. So I would say that, to wrap this all up one more time here and like kind of just touch on all the things I've been rambling about here. It's like, dude, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm getting distracted by two squirrels getting it on up in the tree right there. Totally caught me off guard. All right, bring it back here. Okay, so where do they bed? So like, I guess the number one thing that I would say I look forward to predict these areas are those flat spots within, some pretty aggressive terrain. But also, that's not like necessarily locking anything in specifically. Like, that's for sure where they're going to be. Sometimes I would say I also look for thicker areas, like maybe there's a timber cut or just like past land use that has disturbed the land. Maybe an old pasture was like, maybe there's a pasture on one of those finger ridges or something that creates an edge that isn't maybe the norm for the area. And then the very next time I go into those areas, it's like, oh, there's the deer bedded in the most open timber that, you could dream up. So I think there's a lot to be learned when it comes to why they want to be in these specific spots on, a given day. And my guess is a lot of it has to do with conditions and their own comfort as well as their safety. And it's just such a deep topic that, I mean, we could dive into a whole bunch of different theories, but I think that's where the randomness and kind of the frustration for us hunters is probably always going to be, to a degree. Is like, we're never going to nail that perfectly because we're not them.
Yeah, I think the longest standing theory for especially hill country, whenever it gets thicker and or just the terrain gets a lot steeper and harder to map out, is they'll just just look at the leeward side of the ridges and kind of mark them off on your map, and that's where they're going to be. And a lot of guys, they pick out those, and I say a lot of guys because I used to do this all the time. They pick out the very obvious leeward sides of ridges everywhere, and it doesn't have to be the leeward side, just beautiful, picturesque moment of leeward side of a ridge for the predominant wind. It can be just this tiny little, you can barely even see it in the topo lines, and where a ditch just runs up, and that little ditch creates enough of a terrain feature that it pieces them on technically the leeward side of the ridge, but they're not. They're on the windward side of the ridge almost, but just a little bit cantered off, and they're tucked up into a ditch, and it's like you would have never realized that unless you started and to go out and be able to mark all of those locations in addition to all of the leeward sides of the ridge, and then pick out like, okay, I think today, dependent upon the wind and the time of day, they're going to be bedded here. It's really difficult in those situations. I've come to see, because even when flying a drone in that type of terrain, you could fly the same property for 30 days in a row and try to guess where they're going to be bedding every single day. Sometimes you're going to be right, because there are some form, if there's a little bit of habitat diversity and they just prefer that area in general, there's a lot of food there or something, then yeah, they'll probably repeat that spot. But whenever you get into just open, monotonous timber that's continuous, it does become really difficult. It becomes a lot more random, and trying to pinpoint exactly where they are that day, it's really tough, even with a drone looking at it the same exact day, or day to day to day. Later in the podcast, I keep trying to get inside of Zach's head. When he finally starts to let us in, the number one thing that's on his mind is funnels. I'll pat myself on the back a little for being one of the reasons funnels are so strongly on his mind. And for anyone who hasn't watched my past video on locating invisible funnels using TerrainX, I'll leave the link in the description for that. TerrainX and LiDAR are the two features that I use more than anything else inside of the onX Hunt app. And I can't stress enough how powerful it is to understand where deer are forced to travel. Funnels can be very obvious sometimes and only 30 yards wide, or in some cases they can stretch out thousands of yards across. But in either scenario, if terrain, habitat, water, or even human pressure is forcing deer to move through specific sections of the landscape, I want to know about it. If that's something that interests you, use my code WR for 20% off at onxmaps.com. Scan the QR code on the screen or just hit the link in the description. Thanks, guys. Another thing that I've seen, I was going to ask you about this, is whenever you get into those monotonous timber situations, I kind of figured that'd be what was your most difficult form of habitat, with the really hill country and then monotonous timber. Have you seen that deer begin preferring being closer to, like, so let's say you have a 3,000 acre block or 15,000 acre block of just continuous timber, and there's human presence, not hunting pressure, but just human presence around the north side of it, and there's absolutely nothing to the south side of it. Have you seen that deer start preferring to be closer to the human presence over going down into the middle of nowhere?
It's almost like you can see two different extremes. Like, you will see them go really close up to like road access, houses, definitely people's yards is another one. Like, I've noticed in whether it be Georgia or New York or Kentucky or whatever, but like you can be driving through the hills and you see these little like down in the holler, you see the houses or whatever, like a kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, like a string of houses down in the bottom. And at night, if you drive through there in people's like, garage lights and stuff, you'll see deer just standing around right in the yards. But then you could look at the map and it's like, oh, well, it's all, a big public land forest up above. They're just dropping right down in here at night, just as soon as it gets dark. I mean, we see that all times of the year. And so, to your point, yes, you see that a lot. Also see a lot of deer living right off the gravel roads. So like one of the things that I'm still like, I still have to kind of hype myself up to get the confidence to hunt it, is like, man, right there where like if you park right here, this deer that's right out on this ridge, like you can see the top of the ridge. I mean, they are there and they're laying there because they know that if you park right on them, they're going to have the best escape route for that move possible. And it's going to be super obvious that, us idiots that are two-legged are going to come, like, we're just so stupid, like we think that we're so smart. Well, they make us look like fools way more than we make them look like fools. And I think that like living by the road is an unbelievably good example of that. Like, if they know that on that calm, crunchy day, that there's no chance they're going to be able to park and just walk right down the ridge to them, well, then they're going to win. I mean, they're going to win 100% of the time unless you get real creative. And I think that's like where I have to hype myself up to, like, okay, trust that they're going to be there and get creative to get into those spots. But sometimes it's hard to believe in that when, there's so much land, like, well, and I like to explore, so it's like, why would I hunt this ridge that's 300 yards off the road, or this finger that, or bowl or whatever, that's right below the road where they can lay there and kind of watch you as soon as you pop in there. I mean, again, they're on the right conditions. I think they're going to win that game 100% of the time unless you're being creative. And then on the flip side, though, I do think that maybe this plays into personality of certain deer, and this may be something that you've experienced more than me even, but it seems like you got those ones that want to be by the road, and then you got those ones that want to just be like seriously in the deepest, weirdest hole ever, and they're like so far from where people ever go that, that like they're like weird. It's like kind of like Bigfoot, it's like people say they see it, but did anybody ever really see it? It's like it's like that big buck hanging in the, very back of a piece of public land or whatever where nobody ever goes. I think that happens too, but I don't really know. Same thing as like where they bed on certain days. I mean, it plays into that conversation. It's like, is it conditions? Probably sometimes. Is it food? Probably sometimes. Is it, just having the right defense plan? That's probably a big part of it, but it just like sometimes, um, yeah, they really are right under your nose. And I think there's additional things that could, like little variables that could improve the odds of one being there. Like one quick example that I'll lay out. I talked about that, like driving through Kentucky and you're in the holler and there's houses lined up. And then, maybe on either side of the road, there's public land on the big ridges, but down the bottom, there's these little parcels of private land. That's essentially creating this landlocked section, or at least from one direction for the public access. So a lot of times people got to come in a long way to get into those spots from the normal, hunting access or what majority of the hunters are doing. When that's the case, they can be right there above people, listening to people moving around at the houses, getting in and out of their vehicles, coming and going down the road. And really, they're not getting that pressured from the bottom up, unless somebody that lives down there obviously is taking advantage of their ability to access, that that land where the majority of hunters are coming from the top. I think those, well, and again, too, when you've got a bunch of different parcels like that, like how I'm kind of picturing many of places I've seen um, across the country, where there's like a bunch of different people's yards and houses down through a valley. It's like all those different landowners are just like different barricades, I guess. Like you probably just aren't going up through there very often. People probably just don't, access that way. And I feel like if you compare that with like uh, a long way from the hunter access, like if that's taking you a mile plus to get back into, that valley close to that private land, then like probably just not that many people ever going there. So it's like you're getting a little bit of both worlds in that situation where you're close to the humans, but you're also far from where like actual human danger is coming from. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something that I studied a lot this year and paid attention to was, that's kind of why I asked it. Obviously, was that deer were spending a significant amount of more time next to human presence, and that doesn't mean hunting pressure, just general human presence. And uh, back to what you said, I have actually haven't talked about that. That there are two kind of extremes that I've seen. There are groups of deer that live off on the bottom of the 3,000 or the 5,000, 15,000. They just live in the literal desolate middle of nowhere and they never leave that area. They just kind of roam their little 1,000 acre circle and they're happy about it. But then on the flip side, there are especially does, but there's always intermixed a mature buck from what I've seen. And oftentimes I don't know if this is a coincidence. It just happens to be the biggest mature buck in the area is right up against that human presence. And oftentimes he's in an area where the habitat allows for it. So they can't, from a house or from the road or any of those types of areas, they can't see into where he spends his time at unless you walk up to that particular area. And like, for example, the video I just did was on the 10. I called him and he lived in the 200-acre section right up against the dirt road and surrounded by 4 homes. And he's 160-inch mainframe 10 in southern Missouri. It just didn't make much sense. And another deer, the biggest deer I'd ever recorded, he was 166 inches, and he was in southern Missouri in a small 30-acre patch of maybe a 10-year-old clear cut, 8-year-old clear cut, and he was surrounded by 15 houses, cattle pastures, a sawmill was 150 yards away. Like it didn't make sense. But that's where he lived. He lived in that small 30-acre patch. And at nighttime throughout the day he would get up and move around his 30-acre patch. At nighttime he would get up and he'd walk into the fields and go out and browse. So how you would hunt that deer, I have no idea, but there were hundreds of people in southern Missouri every day driving down the highway within 15 yards of this buck right off the edge of the road because he's right against the road every day. And I've always thought like if all those people that love hunting that are driving past if they
Right.
knew they were driving by 166 inch,
Oh yeah.
oh, just beautiful deer. But um Yeah, anyways, I wanted to get back. We could talk about that topic for a really long time. I feel like I really want to try to get back into your methods because that's one of the things that makes you such an interesting person is that you're always hunting on the ground, almost always, and you have a knack for slinging arrows through deer, and that those two in tandem don't happen that often. A lot of people kind of struggle with that tactic, and I think you've brought the tactic back to where a lot of people are very inspired to do it and a lot of people are failing at doing it. And a lot of people maybe they're hunting in the forms of conditions that don't allow for it and this and there. But where did the inspiration come from for you to even start hunting in that style?
Well, first thing I'd like to clarify, I'm also failing plenty. Don't get that wrong. But I really got inspired by watching Whitetail Adrenaline. That's how I was first like introduced to this super aggressive and how I viewed to be intense bow hunting. It's like, man, I want to do that. So I started watching their DVDs probably around 2015 would have been the first time I saw that. I had heard of it prior to that, um, but had never actually watched it. And then when I started watching it, I was like, oh, this is something that I want to do. And then also, like, I guess that was like the initial inspiration. And then, like, while hunting public land you know, over time, I kind of just physically was burning myself out from carrying the gear in to go set up a tree stand every time. Hang and hunt is like it's like a cool term, It's like hang and hunt. Cool, sick. No, actually, it sucks carrying stuff to hang and hunt every single time, especially around the years of 2015, 16 when, you know, this whole process kind of began. Um, those stands were not light. They were not quiet. I mean, they were for the time. They were great for, 10 years ago or a little more. It's like pretty pretty sweet options for the time. And you could hang them quick. I mean, there was a lot of benefits compared to like, you know, some of the other stuff prior to it, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't know. It just wasn't in my mind. It was like this can't be the most efficient way to hunt like mobile or hunt aggressively. And as time went on, it just kind of became more clear that like if you really want to be as mobile as possible and like I guess just be able to be aggressive because you could be undetected. It seemed like the best way to do that was to be on the ground. And um, there's a lot of other benefits too that like I mean I could talk about more, but like shot angles, I prefer on the ground. Being in a tree stand, especially in a setting like what we talked about at the beginning, where it's like steep ridges. I mean that like even 20-yard super steep downhill shot. I mean that's like nightmare for me. Like when the deer goes from being like this to being like that because you're so far up. That's
Well, and if you're
tough.
in the terrain and he's 20 yards away, then there's a chance that he's an additional 20 foot down elevation.
Yeah,
So yeah, that just
totally.
makes the shot even sharper. Yeah, and gets
Hmm.
a lot tougher. But
And then like as far as cover goes, like I think a lot of us feel at ease when we get in a tree if that's what we've always done. But same situation, like you're in maybe one side of the tree, you've got the super steep downhill angle to shoot, but then on the other side of you, the thing's right at eye level, and now all of a sudden your cover's like not really that good. That's the shot you'd prefer. That's kind of your slam dunk, but now you got to be really careful because the thing's looking right at you as it works down a bench or something. So there's a lot of like little things that just continued to like form my opinion and my style, I guess, as far as like what I felt comfortable with and what I felt confident in. And it really just took like making the plunge, like, okay, we got to just do this instead of like dabbling. And so 2016 and 17, I would say I dabbled. Shot one on the ground in 17. But it wasn't until like I had kind of started to fall back into the same trap. Like 2016, we hunted off the ground some. Bow hunting off the ground, like really making an effort to do that. But then as the season progressed, I kind of just slowly fell back into my old ways. 2017 was kind of like same thing, doing a little bit of dabbling, going back and forth. And then I think that Jake and I ended up shooting a buck on the 13th of November in 2017. But it was like the day before that, we had been in a tree, and I remember being like, I'm back to that point again where I don't know why I'm doing this and I hate it, and I'm just getting angry, and my confidence is getting shot when I, bang metal pieces around trying to climb up into a tree. And so I was like, I just want to be done with this. And I like remember making the decision that like that was it. That was the last day. And then we shot one the next day on the ground. So I think that even in itself is like pretty maybe influenced like the style change even faster than what I like. Had I not ended up getting that opportunity with Jake the very next day, who knows? Maybe this process would be a little bit slower, but I feel like it really just boosted my confidence, made me believe in it, and then it was so much easier to commit to that idea. And then it's just trial and error. You realize like by seeing other deer that maybe you're not trying to shoot that day, like okay, for example, a doe comes in and she busts you because you draw back, you're just practice drawing, and you draw back and your elbow hits a little bit of brush. And it just barely makes noise, where in a tree, maybe that wouldn't be as big of a deal. But now all of a sudden, she's pinpointed on you. It's like, okay, learn from that mistake. Next time, make sure I've really got everything cleared out around me. Um, Make sure you practice drawing a lot before deer get in. Those little mistakes teach you really quickly. And then I think it's like just kind of a snowball from there. Like you got to just be willing to fail and get out of your comfort zone a little bit if that's something that you're wanting to do, or like you want to change your approach. And the main thing that I want to like maybe circle back on real quick to tie a bow around all this is I made the change because I was not having fun sometimes when I was carrying that tree stand and feeling like I had to do something a certain way. I really don't like in hunting when people say you gotta do this. So I try to be real careful about like when I'm talking about what I have had success doing, like making it really clear that it's like you don't have to do anything. Number one thing you have to do is just enjoy your time out there, because if you start going, the opposite way and you're getting frustrated and you're overthinking it and you're basically creating, stress for yourself, you're doing the complete opposite of what your intention was when you first got into the sport. Just go have fun. It's not really that important. It's not that big of a deal. And I think if you're starting to get to that point, then maybe it's time to switch up your style. And maybe that's like, hey, I'm getting stressed out hunting on the ground. I got to go back to a tree. Whatever you got to do for yourself as an individual hunter trying to find your style, just make sure that it's with the intention of having fun. And I think if you do that, then you'll be all right. Because I just, I don't really have a great time. I would say now I'm a little bit more open to sitting in a tree. I don't do it that often still, but I'm definitely more open to it for certain, certain situations. If I could avoid it, I certainly would. But if it's going to give me a visual advantage, I would say, like in flat, thick country, if you can get up a little bit, it might give you that extra little bit to just get the visual, and then you could make a move from there. But yeah, it just boils down to sitting in a tree and that fun for me, and carrying the stuff it takes, kind of takes to get up into a tree, kind of makes it even more, uh, I guess, even less appealing.
Well, probably the most fun hunt that I watched last season. I didn't get to watch a lot on YouTube because I was constantly out flying. But whenever deer are bedding, I do prop YouTube up off into the left hand side while I'm flying the drone, so I can kind of like see what's going on in the world outside of me. And you'd sent me a video where you were hunting, and if I remember the story right, you'd seen some deer off in the distance,
Mhm.
and you were repositioning based off of them. And while
Mhm.
you were repositioning, you bumped a buck that you saw the day prior.
Yep.
And whenever you bumped him, then it was like you kind of had a moment. Actually, you didn't even hesitate in the video. You just freaking darted after him. So you bump a buck, the buck starts sprinting away from you, and you just sprint right after the buck like a lunatic. And it almost takes your cameraman like a second to realize, like, oh, we're doing this. Like this is what we're doing. So then he starts chasing after you, and you end up picking out where he went into to
Mhm.
bed down. So walk me through that exact moment whenever you're walking and you're repositioning on these bucks in the distance and you bump your target buck in this instance, now the new target, and you
Yep.
chase after him. What was going through your brain in that moment?
Well, the very first thing I remember thinking is, and this is just showing my, I feel like it shows my competitiveness versus the deer so much. It's like, man, if you're not going to look back, that's disrespectful. You know, it's like, you got to look back, deer. He just takes off running and never looks. So it's like, I guess that would like, that kind of lit the fire of like, all right, you know, yeah, you're fast, but like, you're also going to get tired as soon as you get to where you feel comfortable. And I think that was kind of the next piece was, where is he going to decide to finally stop? And once he does, he's probably going to be in that decision making point. And so like through spooking a lot of deer in my life, like I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It's like, man, I'll gladly say that I'm really good at spooking deer. You know, like I'm not always great at effectively setting up on them and having them, you know, get right into my lap. But man, I'm good at spooking them. And when you do spook deer, like, and this is not on purpose. I'd trust me. I'd rather not. I'd like to think that, you know, I could be a little bit better and consistent at making the right decision of where to pump the brakes. But like when you bump deer a lot, you start to see these consistent themes. And one of those themes is they run a certain distance, and the habitat and terrain may kind of dictate how far that is. But in this situation that we're talking about, it was pretty open country, but there was still some subtle roll. Like there was kind of a hill coming down from the left, and then on the right there was a marsh edge, and he was running straight down that marsh edge. And as he got further away, there was this one specific kind of, I I don't even know that hill was what you would call it, but a roll or a bump coming, you know, from that hill coming down to the left that was going to block off his view or our view once he was on the other side of that. So I figured if he would get past that, and somewhere over there is where he would stop and look back. From there, he was probably going to make his decision, you know, am I going to go right down into the marsh? Am I going to go left up into the hills, or kind of back into where there was going to be some more like ag country, I guess, in that situation? And so I was essentially just thinking, if I can get to that point where right where it breaks over, where I can see the other side, I'll at least be able to tell which direction he went and then be able to have some sort of guidance for the next move. And so sure enough, we take off sprinting, and like the whole time he's just not looking back. And I'm also thinking in my head, like I'm watching him really, you know, closely. Not as soon as he starts to slow down, I would have hit the deck and just like pretty much laid down before he even turned around. And you know, again, spooking a lot of deer, you kind of learn deer body movements. Like you can kind of tell when they hit that, like, I'm about to slow down. You know, they just check the brakes a little bit. And then that situation, if you could just hit the dirt and not be moving, I think that, you know, you probably could have still got away with it to a degree. And so He never showed any sign of that. He was just headed straight for that bump. I got to that point. Cole was right behind me. As soon as we got there, though, he stopped. He did one look back, and I kind of like to call it it's almost like what you see mule deer do it a lot, where it's like, but whitetails do it just the same. Don't let anybody tell you anything otherwise. Where they stop, and like if the camera is where you're at, they do one of these, and they just like don't really have any, like they're not even close to where you are. And so when they give you that, like, you know, eyes not quite in the right spot, you kind of know that you're fooling them at least a little bit. And I could tell that he didn't have us pinpointed. And once he took off running again, now we got a direction. We know he's not down into the marsh, which is where we had bumped him from. So kind of assumed that there was a maybe better chance that he would just run back into the marsh, but he didn't. And he went up into this, basically a stand of trees that we had seen these other bucks that we were originally headed towards in earlier that morning. So now that he's headed in that direction, it's like, okay, probably a good chance he's going to get in there. This is the theory, all happening like at super fast speeds, like this is all happening also while, we're both huffing and puffing because it's hot and, we've just ran, however far. And so my next thought was, okay, if he hits that band of trees where the other bucks had been, he's probably going to smell that they had been there recently. He's probably going to smell that they were relaxed. Again, maybe this is all weird, deep Zach theory, but, this is what I was thinking. They were in there and they were comfortable all day. And if he smells them, there's a decent chance that that's just where he's going to stop and he's going to kind of post up for the day, like, or for the rest of the afternoon. And if there's still other bucks in there, that might just even be more convincing for him. Like, okay, we're safe in here. But to make sure, I wanted to see as fast as we could the left side of that band of trees. So he's headed in to go into it on the right side. If we could get up and see the left side, we could maybe see if he comes out of there. And so we hustle it on up, try to loop around and kind of use a little bit of low ground to get around that, pop up, immediately bump two more bucks that run directly into that same band of cover. And it was like, well, shoot, it's like, don't really, not sitting here like thinking, man, this would be the ideal setup for the day, like, oh, great, we're nailing it. I wasn't thinking that. I feel like it would just be a total, it'd be an obvious lie if I said that was true. At that point, it's like, all we can do, though, is hope that, this theory that they're going to get in there, smell these other bucks or see these other bucks and calm back down is true. So we watch those other two run in there, don't see anything leave, drop back, get back into that low ground, and then just took the tiniest little bit of terrain back toward, or I guess up towards that cover. And as we're doing that, the original bucks that we were watching leaving when we were moving up and bumped the big one, they're now coming back into this band of cover. And so, like, as they're moving in there, we're moving and trying to kind of meet them, essentially. And there was this one spot that we had picked out that we were headed towards, like, the whole time. We'd picked it out at probably 10 o'clock that morning when we were glassing from across the marsh. And so when we're headed towards this spot, we've got an idea of exactly where we want to go, but it's kind of like you're making a stalk and trying not to blow it all up. I mean, even though we kind of already had, we're trying not to blow it all up again because these deer are on the move back in there. And so ultimately we get to that spot, have just enough time to get comfortably set up and kind of do some of these practice draws and some of the, prep stuff that, we like to do when we get into a setup like that. And all of a sudden bucks start moving in front of us and there's kind of a little opening within this band of trees. And I remember first seeing buck jump from right to left just inside the cover. and get all excited, and it's like, oh, here, like this is about to work exactly like we kind of pictured it all day. And so the first 3 bucks come out, and at this point it's like we've been struggling. We have not had a lot of real close calls. Haven't really been that close to bucks. Actually, I'm not sure that we have had a buck in range, other than the day before when we had the buck that we've bumped. This same day that I'm talking about, we bumped him the day before making a stalk. That was the first buck we had in range. So when these other bucks are coming in, it's like, man, I'm fired up. I'm gonna shoot one of these things. And so as they're coming in, this is kind of just funny additional behavior, I guess. Really enjoy watching deer. Something that I think I've been thinking about a lot more is just body language. And I mean, I've touched on that already telling the story. But when they pop out, there was two that were in, or one was in velvet and two were hardhorned. And those two that were hardhorned were like kind of bullying around that velvet buck. Like, I think if the more I watched the footage too, I really realized this was true. But they kind of pop out and they immediately posture up to each other. And the velvet buck is just like facing directly at us. And the other bucks are kind of off his, I guess, right shoulder. And they immediately just go towards each other and start sparring. And the buck that is in velvet is the one that I'm going to try to shoot. Not that he was really that much bigger or anything, but it was just the one that I kind of had in mind. And so I'm like, okay, as soon as he turns and looks at these other bucks, because certainly he's going to look at these other bucks that are sparring right beside him, that's when I'm going to draw. Well, he just never looks at them. And I find that to be really interesting because, I mean, if you showed me that clip without, knowing the outcome, I would put quite a bit of money on, well, like, is he going to look at them? Well, yeah, of course. They always do. Well, he didn't. He just like stares right in our direction. And all of a sudden they stop sparring and they kind of start chasing him. And now he's running right at us. And so I remember in that moment being like, well, nice. You've screwed this up. And it's like, okay, I don't really have a good opportunity. He's getting closer, 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 closer. And then all of a sudden he's at 3 yards on the other side of a cedar tree. I do manage to get drawn, and somehow the other two are just paying so much attention to him that they don't see me draw. And about that time, well, I guess maybe 30 seconds or so goes by, and I'm just waiting for that buck to step out. And it's like, okay, as soon as he clears, like, it should be pretty straightforward, pretty close. And all of a sudden I hear something walking, and out of the corner of my eye, I look, I kind of turn my eyes and look, and there's the one that we had bumped. So I end up turning and shooting at that buck. But the main points, I think, are, to kind of go back. I chased the buck because I wanted to know where he went. I wanted to know exactly which direction that, he was headed. And I think that if you go back to when we very first bumped that buck, we talk about like not hesitating. If I would have hesitated, if we'd have been 30 seconds later, he would have made it out of sight. But by running and covering that ground as fast as possible, we were able to confirm, like, this way or this way. I mean, you could say that's 50% increase. I don't know how you ever put probability or, a percent or a number on how much it increases your chances, but like, it kind of felt like 50%, right? If we would have got to the point where we saw that he went to our left, but not known, I mean, why wouldn't we have went to the right? Because the other bucks had went down to the right, the ones that we were originally moving towards. We had bumped him out of the marsh. Why wouldn't he have just circled back into the marsh? So I think in that situation, just trying to eliminate that like question mark part of the hunt, and just at least be able to say, okay, we're gonna put all the effort into this theory rather than be torn and kind of thinking, I hate overthinking it. There's nothing that makes a hunt, you know, be turned from fun to really frustrating faster than like that indecision and that overthinking it. running in that situation totally prevented the overthinking and made everything from that point forward much easier. And it it was very odd, as far as like a bow hunt, and like it's definitely not the textbook strategy. But over the years, between hunts that I've had and my friends have had, I think it has just given us all like extra confidence to kind of go for those things, especially when everything's kind of already going wrong. Like if you bump one, like what good is it really going to do at that point to like just sit tight and not do anything? If he's going in a certain direction, kind of no matter what habitat you're in, it's like you maybe don't necessarily have to go right at him, but like another quick example that I won't dive into a ton, like I make it a very basic, a very basic detailed story, but I think get the gist of it. My friend Ben and I bumped one time in open timber, kind of the setting that we were talking about being the hard stuff to hunt at the beginning. When we bumped that buck, we didn't necessarily chase him, but we gave him a little bit of time. Then we went down and we kind of confirmed which direction his tracks were headed as soon as he kind of got out of sight. And then we backed off and we made a big loop around and essentially tried to get on the other side of the direction that his tracks were going. And we ended up getting a buck that night coming from exactly where those tracks were pointed towards. So that's another different example of like chasing one, but doing it in a more controlled and calculated type of, or at least what would appear to be more calculated, I guess. But ultimately, us circling him was like still chasing him, like still following where he went. Where I think when I was younger, if I would have bumped that buck, I would have been like, back to the truck. We got to try something like fresh start. But at that point, there's two factors. One is like, well, that was a nice buck, and we definitely would like to see him again. And the other part was like, we're already so far from the truck that it's like, by the time we get back and we restart completely, it's like, is that even going to benefit us? So I think that, in that situation, it just made sense. Like, what the heck? We've bumped him. Let's try it. And like, since then, or, I guess I say since then, since we've started the hunting public, it's like we've all had like similar enough experiences to where it's like, well, the bump and dump thing definitely is real. It definitely takes some like, you got creative thinking, I guess, and some thinking outside of the box, and it doesn't always work. I mean, we've absolutely bumped them and tried to do the same thing, and it doesn't work out. But man, like if you find where one likes to be, whether that's today or for the next 2 or 3 days, there's a decent chance that if you spend time in that area, that deer is going to be back there. And I think that that's just something that you know, you, you're not necessarily going to see that in like the rule book, what I like to call the whitetail rule book, or you
Oh
know,
yeah, you'll never see that in the rule book.
no. so so it's like if you're reading into the rule book too much, like I guess just be hesitant of like what you see people say you should be doing. Like that's why I say don't even take what I'm saying to heart. Take little pieces of that and learn, what applies to you or the situation you're in on any given day. But like, it's just it doesn't have to be done a certain way. And I just think that there's so many things that tell you that when you're especially when you're new to it. Like I think back to myself like in high school and college when I was like just taking in so much content, like video. I was reading everything that I could. I was just trying to do it like the people that you see, the pros, like the people you see on TV. It's like you just got to do it the way that works for you and, kind of just go with your gut. And through experience, you'll get that gut feeling, I think. And sometimes you'll just sit there and overthink it and then get mad, but that happens too.
As for you going in and the bump and dump strategy, and I've gone in and done some more research, and I haven't posted a lot of that content yet, but going in and intentionally bumping more deer, and intentionally bumping them more than once, multiple times, and showing them your body or driving the vehicle by and bumping them that way, or a bunch of different variations. And in almost every case, it's always a mature buck, by the way, is that I'm trying to bump, at least. They always come back home. Very often they come back home within that same day. They're circling back into that area within 3 hours, 5 hours, somewhere in that range. And in some cases it goes all the way to 12. I've seen 24 to 36 hours before, though, where they leave that area completely. But I think it depends on what form of habitat that you're in, and where that next set of cover is, where they're going to be bumping to, and that's going to kind of determine that. The one instance I have seen where I 100% made an effect on this deer, and I'm sorry to anybody that was hunting this property, but I was researching this really beautiful mainframe nine, and I'd been researching him for 3 weeks or something at that point, and he kept going to the same little field and making a scrape every single morning, every single evening, every single morning. He was there all the time, and I had a trail camera in that area for research purposes, continuing on the trail camera research that I've been doing. And I was like, you know what? Let's just go re-aim that camera. I'm going to act like a hunter that walked into his field where he's got his stand, and he saw this really fresh big scrape, and it's like, I'm going to move my camera and aim it. I didn't do anything. I didn't drive up to the camera and then just touch it and move it. I walked all the way in, boots on the ground, stinking up the whole place, touched the camera with my stinky hands, moved the camera, aimed it at the scrape. That night, after I moved it in the middle of the day, once he went off in bed, to bed, and I knew that he didn't smell me moving into that area whenever he's bedding, because I know where he was bedding, so I was able to sneak in there. And I moved the camera, and then that night I got a picture of him, and it was his nose right up against the camera. Never saw him again. Hit that scrape, not once. So maybe it has an effect whenever it's tied into something like that, like a scrape specifically. I know that a lot of people have seen that, where human disturbance in a little area that they find safe, where they're making a scrape, a community scrape format, they never come back to it. They move their camera, or maybe the buck sees your camera and they never move back toward it, or you just try to hunt on top of that scrape and then you disturb the area and he never comes back to the scrape. So maybe there's something to that. But anyways, that was just a random thing that I thought of off of what you'd said. I wanted to go back, and in your hunt, it seemed like there was a really critical moment that had taken place where you guys were positioned in an okay spot, and you either were going to move up to the shelter belt, kind of where all the bucks were moving to, or not, or just kind of stay put. And you guys chose to move up, but I was wondering, if you guys hadn't and you'd stayed where you were at, prior to making that decision, would you have had the same shot opportunity present itself potentially? Is that something you could play out?
So the night before, and where we bumped him from, there's like he was actually in close, like located himself pretty close to a food source that they were using. Like the night before, we had seen multiple bucks either going towards this bean field, or like when we bumped him the day before, he ran towards that bean field. And then we moved thinking that maybe he had like done a circle, kind of like to your point of like, but if we're going to bump and dump this thing today, which again, I'm talking about the day before when we stalked him, that if he looped back in there, that, our little adjustment that we made would potentially allow us to get a visual on him. We were trying to absolutely bump and dump him that night before, after our initial stalk had failed. It didn't work out, but we did observe that a lot of deer were moving into this field. And so when we made that move the next day up towards the shelter belt, where we ultimately got the shot, I think we could have sat back, and there was still like the shot happened early enough, or the movement happened early enough that like they could have made it back there closer to the field. But like, I think the problem that, you know, you get in situations like that is there wasn't as much of a funnel. There wasn't as much of an edge that they were going to have to follow. I could have totally seen it being a situation where we're sitting there watching that cover that we ended up getting to and setting up closer towards the field. they come out of that and then end up 100 and 150 yards away and just like going wherever they want because it was so open. There was nothing to necessarily funnel them down. So it felt like if we wanted to be in the game at all for a bow shot, we got to just be right in there with them to where something's going to neck them down to a very specific point. Had you been rifle hunting, the safer bet would have been to sit back because you could have shot, to that edge. But also, I will also say, I think if it was rifle season, they sure as heck wouldn't be coming out of that in daylight. So, it wouldn't have been the same move. But I think that's the advantage you get during bow season is you get just like more careless moves, especially early season like that. Um, and I mean, depending on when your opener is, I mean that might be October, but I think the earlier um, in the season that you're kind of creating pressure on deer, the more or the less it affects them, if that makes any sense. I think if that deer got bumped during rifle season, he'd have stayed in that and been like laying down scared until probably 2 hours after dark.
Yeah, I think that's something what you'd said there that I see a lot locally with just or just in general other hunters that I know out of state where they end up having a lot of encounters with bucks, and those encounters are at that 80 to 150-yard range, and they're not going in and taking the risk and positioning themselves right on top of that spot. And it's like if you would just hunt stop being so passive for 7 days out of the week and hunt aggressively for like two of them. Like, you'd put yourself right on top of them intentionally, knowing that that's right where they keep going. Probably going to have a lot better shot, but a lot of those guys continue to be passive. So maybe by listening to this, they're going to get a little more aggressive this season. One thing I also noticed with whenever you took the shot at at the buck that you actually shot, um, you're aimed over at the velvet one on the left, and then you had to cycle around and pull the shot off on the deer that you actually aimed at. And whenever you took the shot, he didn't drop at all because he wasn't in the party of the other three where they kind of knew something was going down where you were at. And if you look on the left-hand side of the camera whenever the shot happens, I'd recommend going and watching the video, or maybe I'll overlay it or something in this. Um, the buck that was on the far left that knew you were there, he dropped 18 inches as
Oh yeah.
soon as that bow fired. I mean, he was down, and it was
Ugh.
pretty cool to see the difference between a deer that is close. Both of them are close to you, but one has no idea, and the other one knows something's up. And how fast he was able to drop 18 inches just immediately.
And
And
I'm
yeah,
pretty sure he do one of these too. Like as I get like the bow to stop moving, he kind of gives the
the one that you shot.
no, the other one, the one that does the drop. The one that I shot at, he's looking at the other
Yeah,
deer.
he's looking at the other ones the whole time. Yeah.
But the other one I'm pretty sure that does the drop. Kind of
It looked like all three of the other ones were looking in your general area. Like they just knew whether they were looking at Cole or they were looking at you, they knew something was going on right there. And it was just fascinating to see how fast that one dropped. And I think your arrow may have made it 10 yards and that sucker was 18 inches down.
oh
Like he
dude.
was down. So it would have been pretty interesting to see you shoot at one of the closer ones and had they, recognized that you were there and just observe how, anyways. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool little moment. Another thing that was fascinating from that was whenever you were tracking him and you came across this spot where it was like a 30 to 50-yard circle of just blood spilled in every direction. And I'd seen somebody comment it, and as soon as I heard you say that, it was the very first thing that I thought. And it was that he was fighting off coyotes in that instance. And I've seen it multiple times. I actually haven't been able to observe the blood being splattered like that. But it was the only thing that made sense to me in the moment was that coyotes moved in and he was kind of playing a ring of fire and trying to fight them off in a circle. And I found that to be really, really an interesting thing. And
Well, your story, I believe that you told. I can't remember if you told me the story before or after that happened, but it was whenever one of our conversations, whether it was while we were recording a podcast or while we were just talking on the phone. But you told me the story where I believe a woman had shot a buck and you were there
mhm.
kind of keeping an eye on it with the drone and it was still alive and then you came back and it was dead, but you could tell that coyotes had basically chased it around. And
Yeah, and in that one, he was able to back himself into a pool of water. So there wasn't a river or a creek or a pond in this area, but it had just poured rain that night. That's one of the reasons they lost the deer in the first place. They didn't have any blood, and he backed himself in like a, I don't know, knee high pool of water that was probably 15 foot by 15 foot. And the coyotes were trying to attack him from the perimeter of it, and he was just standing there spinning in circles in the water, left and right. And if he had not been in water, then I think you would have had a similar situation where there's just blood splattered all over the place with him spinning and while he's wounded. But in this case, he was in water, and it was also pouring rain still. So none of that stayed back for us to be able to see it. And then that next morning, he was chewed on probably 50% of the way through, mostly on the backside of himself. And I have the long-standing theory. I've told the story quite a few times now in different podcasts, but I think that other deer moved in and they were actually trying to protect him in that instance, because whenever I came back and I flew the next morning, there were 15 to 20 deer or more all within a 100-yard circle of where he was at. And it was like,
interesting.
what the it was very weird. And also just to think from the mentality as to why the coyotes wouldn't have continued to eat off on him. Like, they ripped him open and the intestines were splayed out, but they barely had taken any of the meat. So why go through all the effort to fight this buck and get him
Yeah.
down and get him killed to just rip him open and walk away? That didn't make any sense to me.
Unless they just, maybe thought, okay, we're not going to fight him. Like, okay, we've done a little bit of damage. We're not going to keep fighting him. This is not worth our energy. And they were able to make that decision and just say, okay, we'll revisit this. Like, one theory that I have on that, like, that hunt's a tough one, to be honest, the one that we've been talking about where I chase the buck, because there's a lot of things that I'm really proud of, but then there is that, like, that's the first deer that I've ever, like, lost to meat to coyotes. Like, I've never had that happen to me before. So, like, it definitely is like a huge bummer and something that I, like, I don't know. It's just like, it's a tough one. Like, I really feel terrible and I feel like I made mistakes after the shot that, had I not made, the outcome could have been differently or went differently. And I think kind of the theory that I have, and this is, I'll kind of talk about the lessons I learned, I guess, because this is maybe the most important part. Number one thing I think I did is I doubted the shot too much. Like, I think I let other people telling their opinions so strongly about frontal shots kind of get into my head for, like, just enough. Like, just enough to where I kind of was like, oh man, maybe what if I did make a bad decision? Like, what if I was wrong? And instead of just trusting the fact that that arrow hit exactly where I was aiming, like, so the arrow is a smidge low as far as, like, the absolute perfect 10 ring shot, but it's also um still right, like, it's still right in there. I think where I well, I think the reason it was low is, like, right at the very bottom of where I felt like I could hit and it still be a perfect shot. But he also didn't drop. Like, I had anticipated him dropping at least a little bit, but he
Yeah.
didn't. And so when he didn't, I thought, ooh, maybe I am too low. Maybe this is, all these things kind of go through my head. But I also still, if you watch the video, my initial instinct is like, it looked perfect, right? And I kind of still, maybe perfect isn't the word, but, like, very much lethal. And so I still feel that. Where I went wrong is I went to the other side of that shelter belt to do the same thing we did earlier, to see if he left on the other side. And I got there and I stood there for, I don't know, feels like a couple minutes, but it was probably like 15 seconds, and all of a sudden here he comes out of there. And the sun was setting, and the sun was almost directly in line with him and where he was running towards. And where he was running towards was it was a canola field, which is, like, it's pretty unique crop, like the way that it grows. You know how like corn and soybeans, they have these rows.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to just walk down different rows. I mean, even when it's you know, even when those plants are mature, like you can still just get in between them. You don't have to like just plow through the crop.
Not canola.
Yeah, it's like it grows and it's like the stems are so close to each other that, if anything walks in there, it leaves like a permanent trail through there. And so, interestingly enough, if you were to look at an aerial image in areas where there are canola fields, it's super obvious where deer have walked and bedded and where they have, uh, spent a lot of time since that plant was there. And obviously, if you're looking at an aerial image, it's usually like not from right now, but, may give you a little bit of insight as to how they use the terrain within that field or whatever, even if it's a different crop. But anyhow, I was really paranoid about him running onto that field. And the reason is because my thought, at least, is if he runs out there and I don't see him go in there and I can't confirm, like, what if I get there and there's no blood? What if I get there and I don't know that he's in there? That's not a grid searching scenario. Like, that's not one where you just go walking. You're going to destroy the entire field. And so when he was headed that direction and I lost him in the sunset, so like it was really weird. I can very clearly remember pulling my binos up and it looking like he was running into fire, because of the sun right behind him. Really interesting, visual to have so clear in my mind. But as he disappeared into that, it looked like he was going to hop like he was headed right for the fence. And at that point, he had separated himself quite a bit from the shelter belt. So I go taking off running. And I think I was also just amped up and the running had all worked out to that point. So it's like, well, I'm going to just keep the pedal to the metal. And I really wanted to be able to confirm that he went into that field. Just felt like that would also give me better odds of getting permission. It's like if I see him in there, at least I can go walk to that spot. And, this is all stuff I'd actually even thought about before the hunt because, you know where the land, the boundaries are. And I knew what the fields were planted in and everything. So when he was headed towards that, I was kind of, freaking out a little bit. So I take off running and I'm going down that edge. And as I get to about where I lost him, as far as distance away from me, I get along the edge and I'm looking out in towards that field and I'm looking at the fence line to see if he like maybe got to the fence and laid down or crashed or whatever. Because at this point, it's all still been very little time since the shot. Like, really, my main hope is, and how I feel, and what I feel like should be happening is that he should be crashing. Like, he probably is down, but I'm trying to make sure. Well, then I get to this edge and I hear like a crazy crash out of the shelter belt going back now to the right. He had been going to the left, but now this is back in the shelter belt going to the right. I stood there for a second and I was like, well, I got to go look at that field because that could have been any deer, but I'm going to pin this. That way, if I don't see him in the field and it comes back to, trying to figure out what happened next, I at least know exactly where this happened. And so I pin it on my map real fast and I go up to that edge and I sat there till dark watching that field. I ended up seeing deer pop up into that field, but I never saw him. I was like, okay, well, also looking into the sun more or less this whole time. So it's kind of like, I think that I've got it covered, but I don't know for sure. But, hopefully he's just dead somewhere really close to me and I don't, I just missed some things. Anyhow, I gets dark, go back to Cole. We go back to our camp. We watch it. I begin to overthink the shot even more. But then we go back out there after a few hours and we start blood trailing and the blood's just great. Like, totally doubted the shot when I shouldn't have. The blood was just pretty amazing, really. Super easy to follow. Sure enough, we go through the shelter belt. We pop out about where I thought I saw him come out. Gets out into the middle of that, I guess, grass field headed towards the ag field. He's going straight away from where I'd seen him. Everything's lining up with what I saw. But right about the point I lost him, he suddenly like veers back to the right, back towards the shelter belt. And as soon as he took that very first step headed back to the right, I looked at my map and I was like, oh yeah, I bumped him. Like that's totally where he was. And get to where I was when I heard that sound, find the arrow, and find just like crazy amounts of blood and a bed. So basically what happened was shot happened. He runs straight through the shelter belt, gets on the other side, and then decides, ooh, I shouldn't be running out in this open. I'm hurt bad. I think, dude, if I would have not went after him, I think he would have been dead in that first bed on that initial track job. Is because I bumped him and I blasted him out of there at 100 mile an hour. He's already hurting bad because he's hit, in a lot of important stuff. And the half the arrow was still in him, the broadhead side, and the arrow had made it all the way up to, maybe that much it broke off or whatever. And so I think what happened was he ran down through there and pretty much immediately got followed by coyotes. And here's my why I think that happened. While I was sitting there watching that field when it was still daylight, coyote sounded off like so close to me, like straight in line with where I had just, now know bumped him from. And there were just so many in the area in general that it's like, they talk about tracking dogs being able to smell the difference between a, wounded deer and like one that's for sure, mortally wounded or whatever. So like when a dog can do that, why couldn't a coyote do that? And so I think they just got on his trail. And when he got down on that edge, they were just immediately chasing him. And like his last stand was that spot where I kind of got confused on the blood. Well, I shouldn't say kind of. I definitely got confused on the blood. And he made a loop around, then he turned back and went back the way he came from. Not even that far, only like, I want to say a couple 100 yards, maybe at most. And then he just got tucked back into the cover. But basically, he went down an edge, had that, spot where we got a little confused. We finally found that it was going back this way, but at that point, we'd already made contact with a dog tracker. So it's like, well, at this point, let's just, well, we needed a break. Let's put it that way. We needed to eat. We needed to regroup. We were in rough shape because little sleep and in rough shape. And so we took a break and got with the dog tracker and went right to the thing. But my main takeaways are, I think, don't doubt the shot. Like when you see something that you think is good, just trust it. Don't let the other noise get in your head, because I did. And also, I think there is a benefit to chasing them sometimes when you make a shot. Like I definitely will do that again. Like I guarantee I'll do it again. But maybe not every situation. Maybe sometimes just trust it and give it a little bit more time. But when I say all that, and it's like, if that thing would have made it in that field, jumped the fence and died just 30 yards into that field, I may have never got him because I wouldn't have been able to prove to anybody that he was actually in there. Like, I now know that I would have been able to because there's plenty of blood, but like, so anyway, it's just me kind of rambling about a story that, something that happened to me. We can move on. I just think that that's like important to note too, because like, lot of things learned and lessons learned the hard way on that one. And, I'm not necessarily proud of those ones. I'm proud of all the other things, not really proud of those, but hey, it's reality and it's something that decisions I made and I learned from.
No, in my opinion, whenever I watched you chase after him, I I thought in the moment as well, like right decision. I thought that is exactly what you should have been doing, just because of exactly what you said. If he'd popped into that field, it just made sense. Everything's being so open and being able to see so far, it made a ton of sense. Whereas if you're in a setting and you've just got thick cover all over the place and you want to try to replicate that idea, it's like maybe not going to work as well, because he's just going to bump from one piece of thick cover and disappear and you're never going to find him again. And it also heavily depends on the shot, whereas in your shot, you definitely hit him in the pump house. He was going to be dead. Whereas some guys, they might poke one into the liver and he's going to
Right.
die within 24 hours, 36 hours. And then they go and replicate the same setting, bump him. And now he's good enough that he's not just going to run 200, 300. He's going to run a mile.
Mhm.
And he's not leaving good blood at that point. So
Yeah.
you're screwed. You're not going to find him unless you have a
Yep.
really good dog or a thermal drone. But
Yep.
yeah, no, in the end, I think you made a good decision still, even though it didn't pan out. And
Mhm.
I think that was the coolest hunt that I saw this year by far. So I'd heavily recommend everybody to go and check that one out if they haven't already. I'm sure most people have. I wanted to get into a hypothetical real quick just for fun. And I was gonna say if so I guess we can go back to the initial habitat that you struggle with. But just so picture that in your brain, and now imagine that I gave you the exact pin, the exact location at 4 a.m. I said he was going to be here, here, and here today. This is where he's going to bed. This is where he's going to move. Here's his whole plan. But there was zero wind, leaves all over the ground, dry as all get out. What would you do?
I would probably use the cover of darkness for one. Like just go super early. And that's something I don't do a good job of. Something I want to get better at. Um, because I think like while I don't have exact pins or like I'm pretty anti cell camera. Like I don't know where they're at exactly, but I'm more and more confident every year, like by bumping them or just seeing sign of them or whatever. I'm getting more confident in predicting those spots, and I want to be able to trust that better and just commit to that idea, pretending that I know the exact coordinates and the trails that he's going to use, and just believe in that. But similar to just using that, even in this situation, this hypothetical you're laying out for me, I think using the cover of darkness for one and just putting as much terrain between, I say as much terrain, it's like putting terrain between you and where he is and where he's gonna be as often as possible to get in there. Like that's one thing that, you know, when you're talking about no wind, that's a tough situation to be in where you got these crunchy leaves. But the only thing that's going to really deter your sound in those situations is some sort of land. Like it's pretty crazy even on those calm days. You can be walking along and all of a sudden you pop into the same terrain as a deer and it's like, "Oh, they're right there." Like they didn't hear me at all until I was right on top of them. And I say on top of them, I mean that might be 100, 150 yards or whatever downhill below you, but they didn't even know you were there until you kind of crested the ridge or popped into that terrain with them. And so I think the more times you can put something like land between them and you, the better your odds are. And then also like just pitch black dark down in the low ground where there's very little like moonlight or skylight at all. And just trying to get in there as early as possible and then trying to find a funnel, like I said, maybe at the beginning of this, like trying to find a funnel as close to as possible to where we know he is, like in this situation, or know where he's going to be bedded. Like, and ideally, like if I guess in this hypothetical, you're giving me even trails and everything that he's going to use,
Yeah,
like
I don't
just
know that I was initially going to give you trails. I think after processing that, it's too easy. So yeah, you don't get trails. You just get where he beds. Yeah.
okay. So bedding. So I think that's great though. Like trying my best to anticipate based off of knowledge of the area and how specific tree species grow and being able to read an aerial map and everything or look at aerial images and make these predictions like where is the highest odds spot that he's going to be moving to from that bed to get to a food source. So like for example, if there's a direction of travel that puts him through a funnel that would make for an easy bow shot that I can tell is like maybe not the ideal cover type for food sources. Like let's just say it's a stand of trees that's dominated more of like beech trees and poplar trees and maples, stuff like that, where they're not necessarily going to the base of those trees to feed all the time or as often as they would where there's, red oaks, for example. Trying to predict like where those red oaks may be over those, less desirable trees and kind of get to the funnel that's closer to those rather than just the best funnel, which I think is like a different, just an additional layer of things to figure out when you're hunting in these types of settings. But like, that's part of the fun. I think it's like, okay, sure, maybe we can now pick, let's say, even if we get the bedding right, we can make that guess. In this situation, obviously, you're giving me the exact spot, but even a spot in a situation where you're just guessing, even if you get it right, you still have to make that prediction correct of like which direction he's going to go to leave the bedding area. But even more tricky is how do you get there without spooking him? And I think that goes back to the cover of darkness and just situationally using the terrain to your advantage the best that you possibly can. Like putting that above all, I would say. Well, I shouldn't say above all. I think putting that as like the one of the top two priorities. Like you gotta try your best to get in there quietly. At least that's what I think. Or not even quietly. Like quietly is maybe not the right word. I always try not to sound like a human, and I do have a variety of different tactics for that, depending on the setup and or the situation. Sometimes I try to sound like a squirrel. Sometimes I try to sound like a turkey. Sometimes I try to sound like a deer. I never try to sound like a human though. But the one thing I think I do sometimes, and maybe would be at a disadvantage, especially when we're talking about cover of darkness. There's been many hunts in my life where I get up, man, I start heading into the woods straight up 2 hours before daylight, and I'm still late. Because I just tiptoe, like I'm trying so hard not to sound like a human that I basically can't move at any amount of speed. So, what I'm thinking, especially like haven't been thinking about enough, but I'm thinking about a lot right in this exact moment and have thought about in the past is like, should we just run in here? Like, especially when we get two people, like bring the grunt call, have a plan. Obviously you got to be careful too that you don't just totally wipe out and hurt yourself. But like, would like a little like stop and go kind of trot into this spot be better than just tiptoeing around? Because I think there's two advantages of it. I think one disadvantage, I suppose, of going slow is that you're lingering. It's kind of like the kids outside of the 7-Eleven with their skateboard. They're loitering. It's like when you're in that creek bottom right below the bedding area and you're just tiptoeing for like an hour, you're just kind of loitering. It's just like, get out of there. Like, go just get into the position. Because if he's like, for example, if you're coming up the backside of this ridge and he's over here, he may not hear you. But then you dink around for 45 minutes and all of a sudden now he's made it to here. And now he's like, who's this guy? What are you trying to pull off? Like sneaking up the creek where it's just like, now it's getting gray light and we're just like, oh, dang it, we're running late. Hopefully this works still. It's like, probably not. So, I guess, thank you. You're making me really think about this and how I should probably stop doing what I do too often, I think, is tiptoe. I hate looking back on a season and being able to like very precisely pick out the days that it was like, yeah, you tiptoed around, you weenie. Like you were just being what were you afraid of? Oh, bumping a big buck. Like, well, has that ever even been the end of the world? No. You know what does kind of feel like the end of the world though? Season's over and you're sitting at home thinking about all the times that you were being a weenie. That drives me crazy, man. But I'm saying that like to let people know that like even though a lot of times it's pointed out that like, oh man, like we get this reputation of being these like hardcore aggressive mobile bow hunters. I mean, we still wimp out plenty. And I think it's just trying to help give other people the confidence that like and myself the confidence, like by saying it out loud, trying to hold myself a little bit more accountable of like, hey, don't just talk the talk, walk the walk, get in there and do something a little bit different. And I guess, yeah, I'm thinking in this moment, that's something I just need to plan for and start thinking about now going into turkey season. So that way I can like plan for it in my head. Like as I'm going through places and turkey hunting, thinking about, okay, if I was going to approach this spot from a deer hunting standpoint, would this be the right area to apply that tactic of being way aggressive to get in there early in the morning? And so I know that's kind of strayed somewhat from your question of, if I had the exact, location of a buck, but I think it all kind of plays into ultimately that strategy.
Well, yeah, you actually got to where I was wanting to go, and just kind of more so talking about the tactics that would be going through your mind. I think a lot of people want to get inside of your brain sometimes and think about the exact thing that you're having to
You don't
hash
want
out in
to
that moment. And I know it's a very tough thing to do, and in most cases, you don't want to be in Zach's head, guys. He's
do.
watching squirrels out his window, like you don't want to be there, man. But the, in a hunting situation, sometimes I think people do want to be there, and it's just a fascinating thing to see somebody have so much success. And I know you have a lot of failures. You're humble, but you have a lot of success from the ground, and it's really cool to watch. And I know a lot of guys are out there trying to repeat it, and I feel like sometimes they're walking through the woods aimlessly with not much of a strategy, and they're bumping deer and they're getting discouraged and they're going back to the truck and grabbing their stand and heading back, and you're like, okay, well, let's sit back up. We're not going to do this for 2026. And I think kind of hearing you break down your mentality through some of those situations is really helpful for people.
Do you mind if I pitch you one thing that is just like talking about being in my mind, like just this thing that I think I'm thinking about the most right now, and I keep telling my buddies that well, a bunch of my buddies that I hunt with have been talking about this. It's like the one thing in this situation that we've been talking about the most of hunting in the open timber or big timber situations. And again, I can't stress this enough. Like to me, when I'm talking about this, I'm not thinking about I'm not thinking about a Kentucky or a Missouri or a West Virginia or an Oklahoma, even Eastern Oklahoma, whatever. Like I'm talking anywhere where there's big hills and timber. Like sure, like we've stopped naming the states that we're in as often as we used to, and that bothers some people. And I can understand like wanting to feeling like you can relate better because you know the state, but I can also like tell you from experience of hunting these different areas, it doesn't matter if it's Alabama or New York or Vermont or whatever. The things that deer are doing in one place when it's timber that like what we're talking about, open hilly timber, they're doing it one place, they're doing it another. So, if you hunt in this situation, I think all these things can still apply. There might be subtle variations, but there's subtle variations
Yeah.
within one piece of public land, let alone state.
Hmm.
So, anyhow, the thing that I'm thinking about the most right now is just like getting back to thinking about the funnel. And I know I've used that term quite a bit, and I know that sometimes that can be a very easy thing to just like cliche term in hunting where it's like funnel can mean like a million different things, but like in hilly terrain and you honestly your videos have helped kind of influence this a lot. The thing that you said to me at the beginning of this season that has really stuck with me is marking the places where they cannot go. And whether you're actually physically drawing lines or an X or putting a pin on these places or not, I guess it may that may vary.
Yeah, just logging it in your brain. Yeah.
Yeah, or just
Yeah,
logging
no,
it in
I
your
know I
brain.
do that a lot sometimes. I don't mark up my Onyx. I log it in my brain and catalog. I've been in that area so many times. I know for a
Yes.
fact. Yeah, there's a gigantic cliff here. They will not walk up and down it. Period. So
Mm.
yeah, but continue.
Well, and sometimes that could
Yeah.
be even a log. Like I remember one day, probably 10 years ago, this is back in the area that I grew up. in the flatlands of Ohio. I was driving past this wood lot. It was kind of a rainy day, and all of a sudden it dawned on me. It was like logs. Logs are the funnel. Like big deadfall. Now, not every timber patch has that or whatever, but like they're not just walking straight up and over logs. And
Mm-hmm.
what kind of confirmed that? And it's so weird. I could drive you right to the spot, and we could probably find the old rub on a tree, or it's probably still rubbed, but there was a trail coming out of the woods that had a rub on it, maybe going back in from crossing the road going into the woods. I could see a rub. And in that moment, I could just, with the rain and everything, kind of had like somehow made it just obvious enough where those logs were, and that there was just this one line right between those logs. And so, like, in that situation, we're talking about logs funneling deer. The situation you just stated being a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a really steep hillside and there's an old log road on it. Sometimes it's a combination of rocks and logs, or all of the above. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at topo and you're looking for places that are going to be like the path of least resistance, and just really focusing on those areas, not to say that deer won't go into places that are hard to get to. Like, I think mature bucks absolutely do that. But at the end of the day, to leave those areas, they still have to go through these certain funnels. And I think just getting back to that in that type of habitat and terrain, and like trying to figure out, like I said, the bedding points and the feeding points or potential, and then finding the funnel within that is still it's still a whole process. But putting all the emphasis on your setup, or where your final destination is to that 20-yard little band that is like the freaking point that he has to walk through, and just fully committing to that. Like, if he comes through here, I know he has to come through here. And I think, there's all kinds of different styles I like to hunt. And one of the things that I'm really thinking about a lot right now, because I'm editing it still, is when we do our deer drive hunt in big timber setting. And even in that, I mean, there's a million things I learn every single season, and it's gun hunting, it's doing drives. And I feel like, it can be easy to be like, oh, that's easy. It's like, and we mess it up way more than we get it right.
Yeah.
And every year, like a total madman, I'm sitting there, I'm texting my buddies saying, so when this happened, like, where exactly do you think he went? How did he escape here? What was the exact time of this? And all these different factors, because what you learn in a setting like that is going to help you for all these different styles, like whether that's bow hunting, solo hunting with a gun, early season bow hunting, late season bow hunting, finding rut funnels, finding doe bedding areas during the rut. It all ties together. Like, it's not just, one thing or the other. And I guess the one thing, though, that I feel like right now I'm really hooked on, and just to put you in my
Mm-hmm.
brain for a second, is like, and I don't even know exactly why this is or what it means in full, but funnels, man, I'm on that
Yeah.
right now. Like, I'm so stuck on that, and I've kind of been on it since you brought it up, marking off the spots. I mean, you really had an impact on me with that one.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. I am I am why Zach thinks of funnels. And one thing about it too is that like you're mentioning finding that really tight 20-yard like true funnel. And if you can find those, then those are the spot. But a lot of times I feel like some guys listening, they're kind of like, well, I just I don't have the terrain for that. I never have. There are 0 20-yard funnels, and in a lot of instances, properties that I've mapped out, you end up finding like 300-yard wide funnels. Like in the end, like they can't travel here, but it's a 300, 400, 500-yard wide funnel. And then they go and they'll try to set up on those right on the spot they think the deer are moving on. And I think that's part of the mistake. This is an instance where I would think using a little bit of passive hunting style for a couple times to see where they prefer to move through that 300 to 400 yard wide funnel. And once you start recognizing a preference of one section over another, then you start incrementally moving closer to that area. Now, if you're time restrained, then maybe go scout it for one day and hunt the next day. Or if you have a week, then scout it for 2-3 days and then start moving closer and closer to that spot where you're seeing deer consistently move through. But constantly moving in undetected over and over and recognizing where their preference is to move through that really wide expanse of a funnel, because even a 300-yard wide section can be a funnel in some cases if it's terrain driven. And yeah, I think that's something that's important to mention. Another thing is that I have seen this year, I recorded a lot of it actually, bucks jumping over logs all the time, and the only time they do it is whenever they're dogging a doe down. So if a doe's ducking and dodging, back and bedding, or kind of in that area, and there's logs all over the place, she'll duck underneath a log or next to one, and a buck he'll just walk up to it and hop it. So yes, we understand they can hop every single log in the woods, but in a cruising setting, whenever they're just moving through the terrain naturally, they're not walking up to every log and jump.
I can
They're
walk
walking
across the
around it.
log. I can jump across the log too, but I try not to.
Yeah, exactly. You try to take the path, and even in a setting where like you have a creek and the creek is deeper over here, and then there's this one spot where it becomes ankle high. A lot of times we'll seek out the ankle high portion. So do deer, they seek out the ankle high portion. And then another thing I saw this year is on my property for the video for that mapping, whatever
Mhm.
funnels video that I did. uh, I had mapped off all the areas on my Onyx where I say deer will not, they don't travel in these areas. And this year I drove down to one of the bottoms and I was pulling out my camera gear and getting everything ready because I was going to go set up to try and video. And, or maybe I was climbing to find a cave. I don't know what I was doing. Anyways, I was doing something at the farm. And I turned around and there were two deer moving down the cliff edge towards me. And I saw it, it was almost like watching two mountain goats. They would bounce from one, I mean, they were taking probably 3 to 4 foot hops from rock ledge to rock ledge to rock ledge. But it was a doe that was getting hounded by a 2-year-old buck, and she was trying to get away from him, and he was just all over her the entire time. And so, to that, yes, they will go up and down that form of terrain if they need to. But still, in most cases, I've never recorded it with my drone. They will not. They tend to avoid those types of areas.
Yeah, especially like deer moving in controlled setting, like a cruising buck, or even a buck just following a doe, and they're on the same page. Like I think you can get it. The example you just used, you talked about a doe and a 2-year-old buck. Like respectfully, that 2-year-old buck is not the sharpest tool in the shed yet. Like he's not got the experience, and like it's almost like when you see those oddball moves, it's being made by immature deer. Where I think if you can get a situation, which like one of the most interesting things to see is a lockdown buck with a doe that knows the deal. Like, all right, we're doing that. We got to do this together. We can't just like get out of control and get reckless. Or on the flip side, if you watch a mature buck with a young doe and she doesn't totally get it yet, and she's trying to like, okay, why are you pestering me? I need to get out of here. And he's like laying down the law, like, no, this is where we're going to be. I'm making that decision because I've got the experience and you don't. Where I do believe if you see a mature buck and a mature doe together, they kind of are just like, okay, we're doing this right. We're just moving. Or if we're up on the move to feed, we're just moving together to feed. And it's
Hmm.
like
No,
two deer together.
that's exactly correct. I've never even attempted to explain that visually, what you see whenever that happens, but especially when I've definitely seen the mature doe and the mature buck where they just pick out the. I mean, it is a picturesque spot where they should be, and she's locked down, and he's standing right next to her, and he's just kind of patrolling in a 30-yard circle around her, like, come and freaking mess with me, dude.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and in most cases, it's a lot of younger satellite bucks, and in like in my area, southern Missouri, we don't have the mature buck density for another mature buck to come in and really continue to challenge him. Whereas if you're in a ag setting, that's where you get the big dog fights really consistently. And so yeah, he's really sitting there and he's kind of keeping off the patrolling 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, etc. But it's that picturesque moment where like she knows what's happening. She didn't have to get shoved here. Like she sought out this location and he was already here, and then they just met and it's like, oh, okay, it's time. Let's yeah. So and then they bed down and lock down, and he'll just patrol 30 yards around her, and then every once in a while he'll bed right next to her 5 to 10 yards away, and then he'll get back up when he hears something and kind of patrol again. It is really cool to see. Yeah.
It's almost like you can almost even read it just based off of how and when they're bedding. Like, for example, if it's a mature doe with a mature buck and she gets up, he might just give her one of these. Like,
Yeah.
you're good. I know we're good. Where if it's a young doe and a mature buck, as soon as she stands up, he's like, okay, what are you thinking about doing here? And like a really good example, I could if somebody's interested in like watching this, it was the 2019 season, and I believe I posted the videos in early 2020. But I was hunting with my buddy Grant, and we were in Iowa, and there was a really massive 10-pointer that was bedded with what I believe was a younger doe, and he was doing that, like corralling, like just absolutely pouring his entire ounce of effort into trying to make sure she stayed tight to the river. Where the next, I think it was either the next day or like really, really soon after, we saw another buck with an older doe that I ended up getting a shot at. Ended up hitting high, and then actually Greg shot him with a muzzleloader later that same year. Kind of an interesting side story, but they were both older deer. She had a much more mature look about her, the doe, and they were way more relaxed. Like they were just out there bedded, and maybe, you know, I'm sure things can still happen. Like I'm not to say this is exclusive, but it's just kind of funny to look at the differences of like, this is a relaxed pair. This is a pair where things are out of control. But then we've been talking about the doe. It's like in your situation in the cliff. It's like doofus 2-year-old is just like chasing, even if she's an older doe. Like, I mean, again, I respect him still in his energy. We've all been, we all been that 2-year-old buck, but it's like, it's like, she's probably just like at that point where like, I can't get this fool off me. I'm gonna jump off this cliff. It's like that's how extreme.
He's like, I'm going off the cliff with you. Yeah, it's happening.
Exactly. But I just think like that's definitely a fascinating thing that unfortunately, like certain settings don't allow us to see very often. Like talking about these big timber settings, like you may go a lot of years before you see a buck locked down with a doe. You just have to almost just have to like take somebody's word for it that it gets to see it or it gets to document it and like study film of it rather than see it for yourself. Because I do think it's important to know how they act in those situations, because if all of a sudden you're in the timber and you're with a lockdown buck, like there's a whole lot of new opportunities that you have that you maybe didn't when he was by himself or not paying attention to a hot doe. And so I guess I just think knowing how to read that and kind of understanding the behavior and the body language signals that they're given. Like if you don't see that, watch some game film, like get online and watch somebody's video of it. There's just look up like buck lockdown, whitetail buck lockdown with a doe. Like I could sit there and watch that for hours just because it's so fascinating to me to try to learn their little cues. And like, there's definitely things that you pick up on. Like, I mean, I find myself saying a lot as I get older and older. It's like, man, people are going to think I'm totally weird, but like, I mean, and I am, but it's like you watch a deer for long enough. It's like, dude, there's certain things they're absolutely doing that like are so subtle. Like certain, like, I mean, I know you see it. You sit there and watch them all day, but like certain head moves or, the way that their bodies move or the ways that their eyes turn or like everything is like this little visual cue. And like,
Yeah, one thing I pay attention to a lot lately is their ears. whenever
Hmm.
they're dependent upon how they're alert and what's taking place and their capabilities of just seeing it happen so many times of flipping them in different directions because they have gigantic cone ears, and if their cone ears are not aiming in your direction, me and you could be sitting from 5 foot apart in a tree, and we could maintain a pretty loud conversation with one another. But as soon as one of those cones flips in your direction, you're
Mm-hmm.
screwed. Yeah, don't drop a pin because they can hear freaking everything. So their hearing really sucks because it's kind of directional. It's like a microphone, and they have like a cardioid. I need water. They have like a super cardioid. I think it's just cardioid. I'm gonna stop. I'll have to cut that. I'm not gonna cut it. It's fine. But anyways, they have like cardioid pattern for like their ears, whereas a lot of people kind of start to think that it's omnidirectional. We're a little bit more omnidirectional,
Yeah.
and we can kind of really we can sense direction really well, whereas they have to aim that cone in that direction to be able to pick up anything off of it. And yeah,
No,
that's one
no. Oh
fascinating thing
no.
that I've seen.
Oh no. Now I'm thinking too much again.
Oh gosh.
Got me
Yeah,
thinking
another
about
thing that I'd seen, not to interrupt you because I will forget it if I don't say it, but I
no
recorded in an
sir.
ag setting this year where there was a high density of mature bucks, just crazy high density. I think it was 800 acres and they had 10 mature bucks on it, and big dogs, all big dogs. And they were all trying to tend does, and there was this one that was the biggest dog, and no one was really fighting with him, but everyone was kind of messing with him. There were three other bucks messing with him. And off to the north side of the property, there was a younger buck, and he was just absolutely hounding. He was in his own world. All of the mature bucks were distracted with these other does, and he was literally while running trying to jump on her back, like in the middle of, like he's trying to run with his back legs while he's on top of her, and she's just ducking and dodging and diving and jumping over logs. They did this for like 45 to 50 minutes before she finally got away from him and wouldn't let him breed her. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen, but it was just kind of cool to see though that there were so many does and estrus in one area, and there were so many mature bucks in one area that some of the does and estrus were just getting absolutely battered by young bucks because
Hmm.
there were too many deer for one area, and all the mature bucks were distracted in one area. They're all busy fighting over this doe, the mature doe, or whatever it was, and the younger buck was getting an opportunity. It wasn't really that great of an opportunity because he was having to run like 20 miles per hour on his back legs while he's chasing her everywhere. But it was pretty fascinating to see still.
Yeah. I mean, the the behavior and like density and all that. I mean, it's an endless rabbit hole that you could continue to learn from. And like I said, because there's so many variables and so many situations that, I mean, there's just not two exact same situations in hunting. Like you'll hunt your entire career. I guess I shouldn't say that. Maybe there are in situations where you're hunting the same property over and over and over and over and over again. Maybe you can find something really similar, but like you just talk conditions and property. Okay, maybe you can find some similarity, but probably still going to get really tough to get it to be exactly the same. We're talking temperature, we're talking about cloud cover, we're talking about pressure, we're talking about, I mean, the variability within that is like endless. But then you throw personality into the mix when talking about these different bucks, and it's like, you could never get it perfectly correct. And then throw different, like what I enjoy exploring different areas and different, I mean, different states, different public land areas, different, areas within that section of public. Like, I really enjoy learning new stuff. And then it's like that whole deck gets shuffled again, including all those variables. And it's just like, I say to people all the time, and this goes back to what I was saying about like, don't take what I'm saying as like any law or rule, or what anybody says as any law or rule, because nobody's two hunting scenarios are the same either. Like, I may approach something with one perspective in mind, where your perspective or your situation may be just ever so slightly different. Like maybe that's time of the year, maybe that's, I mean, again, the variable list gets like reset when you talk about two different people's hunting situations. And I've used the example, and this is kind of how I'll end that statement, is like when you even look at the hunting public, you could just say, oh, all the hunting public guys are in the same situation. It's like, the reality is if you're watching from a distance, you probably really don't know anything about what's really going on in our lives outside of what you're seeing on video, for one. And for two, it's like our situations are so different, even though they're pretty close in a lot of ways. It's still so different. Like when I travel to Jake's neck of the woods, for example, I'm all of a sudden out of my comfort zone. And when all of a sudden he's into my neck of the woods, it's reversed. Same thing with Ted, Ward, Greg, Nick, all of us. Like somebody's always in some different situation than what they're used to, even if it's like appearing to be very similar, I guess, like, from one situation to the next. Like everybody's just got a totally different situation and perspective. And then when you throw all these variables into it, it's like there's really no right way to do anything. Just go learn and try to get better. And I think that's always my final kind of tip is like, if you try to get better and you just are critical about what you're doing and like being honest with yourself, in my opinion, you're a good hunter. You got nothing else to prove. You don't have to have, a bunch of bucks under your belt. Like you are a good hunter. You're going to keep getting better too. And like whether you're on year 1 or year 10 or you've shot $1, $0 or $50, you've earned my respect. Like I think that's just something that unfortunately, deer hunting culture or all hunting culture kind of becomes like weirdly, like, I don't know, people can get an ego quickly and it's like, you got nothing to prove, like at least that's how I see it. I mean, and everybody else that cares too much, like, then I don't care about what they think. Like, if somebody's trying to get better and they're really invested in it and they're passionate about it, you got my respect. I'm going to listen to your theories. I'll talk about hunting with anybody, no matter what their success is, if they're passionate and they're trying to learn, because they're going to learn and they're going to learn and they're going to have the success.
Yeah, no, that's actually on my last podcast. I kind of started getting into that topic a little bit more, and my focus was more so on my kids' future in hunting and how they're going to gauge their level of success. Because if you talk to a lot of kids that are interested in hunting right now, that it kind of have exposure to technology, which my kids won't have any exposure to technology, but I mean they'll be able to fly a drone or whatever, but they're not, and they're not gonna have any access to the internet. Anyways, I won't go down that rabbit hole. But if you talk to a lot of kids in modern day that are interested in hunting that have access to stuff like that, then if you're killing anything sub 180, 190 inch deer, then you are a punk. Like what? And I've seen kids be disrespectful to their dads whenever their dad comes home with like a 125-inch buck in the bed of their truck, and it's like just very unimpressed. Or if the kid himself kills a buck and that buck is sub 130, 110 inches or something, and they start getting really heavy down on themselves because, well, these guys on the TV, they kill 220-inch borderline non-typical whatever deer every year. Like why can't I do that? Or this video game, I'm killing a 450-inch whatever freak of nature. And the culture has driven kids to this level where like their expectations get so high and they just get way out of touch from reality. And that's been something that I've been thinking about a lot. As my oldest kid's my son, and he'll be getting to hunting age within a couple of years. And I don't know, that whole thing plays through my brain a lot, is like, how do you keep him grounded to the fact that he realizes like what's important in hunting and not going out and striving for 180 inches or 200 inches consistently. Like there are bigger things that are far more important than going and trying to get the largest trophy thrown on your wall. And I think that literally every kid I talk to that I run into, whether I'm out tracking for somebody's deer, or I'm working on somebody's property or anything, I always try to strike up conversation with kids about hunting. And then I always get tuck down that rabbit hole where they're telling me about these 200-inch deer on YouTube. And it's just like, how do I get that out of your brain? That is not the most important thing. It bothers me.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a huge motivating factor of like, everything that we do. It's like our intention is to reframe everyone's, oh, I shouldn't say everyone. I mean, that's never going to be totally possible, but like every age group's way of looking at it. And I think in a lot of ways we've been pretty successful at doing that. I think that kids, though, are the most important because they're obviously the next, they're the next generation. And like when we first started the hunting public, I was in my 20s, early ish 20s, mid 20s or whatever. And what was really crazy to me is I was all of a sudden seeing these people that were my age or younger. So we're talking like college and high school aged kids that are all of a sudden hunting exactly like the TV hunters. Like they're only hunting out of box blinds. They're only hunting over like a food plot, and they're only hunting in the exact same style and, trying to replicate what they're seeing on these shows, which maybe isn't even actually relatable to their situation at all. And so like, I'm not saying there's anything like, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I just know that there's a lot of ways that like we can kind of get tricked into thinking that that's the best way to do it, when in reality, again, our situation is not that. And so I guess when I go like, I go back to like, what makes somebody a good hunter? Like something that I was just thinking of that plays into that kind of conversation is anytime somebody, and you do this a lot, anytime somebody brings up something to me that is like not the typical way of thinking about it, or brings up something that, I mean, you just did it with the ears. And like, sure, I know that deer turn their ears and their ears are different than ours, but like, I maybe hadn't quite thought of it with the exact spin on it that, if they're not facing right at you in that exact moment, that's different than if they are back. Like, how often is that going to help me? Maybe like one out of every 200 hunts, maybe one out of every 1,000 hunts. But those types of details to me, those are the things that really impress me. Like when somebody brings something up that's out of the ordinary, like that's where I'm like, ooh, I'm excited to listen to this, because so many of us fall into the category, and I know that I've done it, and I'm sure different topics too. I'm sure I do it plenty. But like when people start saying one thing, a lot of people just start saying the same exact thing over and over and over and over and over again. You start realizing, man, there's not that many people like even attempting to think outside of the box. And whatever topic that may be, I mean, we could list them, but you can make your own guesses. It's like not really that many people even thinking almost like for themselves, like they're just thinking based off what they saw somebody else see or do or say or whatever. Like they're just a little bit falling into that category of following too much. And I mean, again, I'm not saying that I don't ever do that either. I'm just saying like a challenge that I have for myself every day. How do I think about something a little bit differently? I think if you do that, I mean, you might just uncover something that you didn't expect too. And I mean, you learn about yourself, you learn about other people, you learn about hunting, you learn about whatever. I just think that that's an important thing to do and easily overlooked. And I just think that, you know, with hunting, like a lot of like sports is another one that always comes to mind. It's like, oh man, you know, whatever football team lost the game because of that one call. It's like, no, there was probably like tons of little details within plays that we could, go back and watch the film of. And it's not, oh, sure, the one pass interference call, sure, that had a direct impact, on that one drive. But like, what about the whole rest of the game? You can't just put all that on the one call. But the masses will just say all the same thing that they heard somebody, oh, well, they only won because of the call. It's like, well, how simply are we looking at this? It's like, let's think for ourselves sometimes, folks. It's like, let's break down the other things that could have been a factor. And I just think sports, hunting, anything you want to talk about. It's like just trying to think about it with an open mind, come at it with an open mind and think outside of the box and like don't make these rules for yourself, I guess. I don't know. Sorry, I may be getting a little too intense here and
Yeah,
getting a
no,
little
I
too
mean, you see the same thing whether it's in politics or anything else where they begin getting, like, say, someone on the right wing or someone on the left wing, you focus purely on your wing wherever you're at in the world, and you never try to go in with an open mind to the opposing side.
mm,
And I think the same thing happens in hunting where they find a style or they find a specific thing people do, and once again, we'll continue to preface, but like we do this all the time. I do this all the time.
yeah.
But you start hyper focusing on this one thing, and you don't really start to see outside of the box anywhere else, and you only pay attention to this particular style. Which maybe if that particular style fits everything you're doing in your form of habitat, then that's fine. But as somebody who's wanting to learn as much as I can about deer for those one little tiny things, the stuff about ears, like whenever a deer's running away from you, observing how they're flipping their ears and aiming them in different directions, trying to pick up a sound, or if you thought a deer saw you or you thought a deer heard you, and then it puts its head down, and you're expecting its head to rise back up, but it doesn't. If you had been paying attention to its ears, in some cases, if it just put its head back down and both of its ears were down, it's comfortable. But if it put its head down and one of its ears is aiming right at you, not too comfortable. And
Mm,
observing these little tiny mannerisms that can give you that one edge moment, and maybe it's one in 1,000, but once you start compiling those one in 1,000 things on top of each other, you
yeah.
become a much more effective hunter. And I don't know, I just think as somebody who's trying to go out and kill a specific animal, I want to know as much as I possibly can about that specific animal every time I go out. And that means reading books from people that I don't agree with and watching videos from people that I don't agree with because they might have a view that I potentially don't. And that's why I love purchasing old books, old hunting books from like the
Yes.
1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s and all throughout that range. And a lot of it is repetitive, but every once in a while somebody says something and it's like, oh, that's a little nugget. And then you just take that and extract it and throw the book away because the rest of it is trash and repetitive, and read and take that one little piece and move on with it. And yeah, I think that's something that's really fascinating. Those is just trying to understand the animal that you're hunting to the greatest ability possible.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
period.
sometimes you're gonna be wrong, come up with these crazy theories, and in 5 years you'll look back and be like, "Well, that was kind of dumb." But like be creative. Like think. I don't know. Just think for yourself and think outside the box, and like you'll figure things out. I think. But I'm telling that to anyone listening. It's like I don't know. It just sometimes it's so obvious that it just gets taken way too seriously. Like at the end of the day, like you're just out there trying to have a good time and like learn about the animals. And I think if you can just like sometimes just like you got to take like I want to take it seriously, but I also don't want to take it so seriously that I'm losing you know the vision of like what it really is about. For one, to have fun, and to two, yeah, just learn a lot about the animal and like different habitats and learn about the woods. Like I just love woodsmanship is like I feel like in recent months I've been getting this different view of even woodsmanship and like how different that can be. I think when people hear that word, they think of aging a deer track or knowing whether a scrape should be something you set up on or not. It's like way deeper than that. Like so deep that I mean we could sit here and talk about it for another 7 hours straight, I'm sure. I mean,
We don't need to talk for 7 hours straight, but what do you think? This is one of the questions I had earlier. We skipped it because I thought we were out of time, but we far elapsed that. What do you think what do you think the most important historical sign is whenever you're out scouting and implementing the woodsmanship mentality, and you see this one thing and it immediately resonates with you, and you realize like, oh, that's something I wanted to know. What's that?
I think a big scrape that is hit year after year holds quite a bit of value. Um, I'm talking like not just guessing that it's going to be hit again next year. I'm talking like, okay, I've been through here during turkey season 4 times, 4 years in a row, and this thing is lit. and it doesn't even really make total sense to me right now, but like I can't keep walking past it, you know. Stuff like that I'd say is like probably one of the most interesting things is a scrape or like annual sign. I mean, even like with turkeys, like dust bowls are similar to scrapes, I would say, or like in elk hunting wallows are the same, but it's like this community area that we're all hanging out. Like we're all literally rolling in the dirt right here. You know,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
that's I mean, whether it's a turkey dust bowl, an elk wallow, or a scrape, it's like they're all kind of just playing in the dirt in that one spot. And if they're doing that year after year, there's usually a couple of different things that are making them do that, whether it's like a secure bedding location, a good food source, a funnel, or just other deer like does, for example. So I think that would be the number one thing right now that I pay a lot of attention to. But that's not to say like rubs wouldn't be similar. Like if you see a rub line that's like, man, they've been doing this for forever, or like maybe even more than a rub line, but like a bedding area
I
rub.
put big stock into those. Yeah. Yeah,
You do?
cluster rubs
Yes.
in an area that feels like a bedding area, and even if you start seeing beds, just know that you're in an area that has very consistent buck activity. It is,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Like
yeah.
I think what's even made me confirm that theory, at least in my head, even more, is seeing it in the mule deer woods and seeing it in the elk woods. It's like if all of a sudden you see the same exact tendency with an elk that's like 3 times the size of a whitetail, where it's like, oh, we're out on this little like secondary point that you talked about that maybe isn't the most obvious thing in the world, but now that I'm looking at the map, it's like, oh yeah, there's the tiniest little bump in terrain right there. It's a little flat spot. There's a little cluster of evergreens around him, and he's got every last one of them rubbed up. That's the bull elk. And you go over here in the 10 states over, and you find the same terrain feature on a different scale. It's probably a smaller mountain that the whitetail's living on, but you find that same little detail in the terrain, little cluster of, just say there's a little cluster of maple around, or cedars, or maybe an evergreen pine or whatever, and there's same deal. Every last one of them's rubbed right around that bed that's like right in the middle of those trees. And elk are doing it, mule deer are doing it, whitetail are doing it, and I feel like that is at the very least, like you're saying, telling you that there's a high frequency of buck activity in those locations. It's not to say that like there's even a lot of times there's not even a way to set up to where like you can even see that or shoot that or anything, but you at least know that that's a piece of the puzzle.
Another thing with the cluster rubs and the bedding and stuff like that that I've noticed is a lot of times, especially if you introduce quite a bit of hunting pressure, whether it's just human presence or there's actual true hunting pressure taking place with people flinging arrows or taking shots at deer, a lot of times those areas that are littered with cluster rubs, and I guess I should preface back, if you're on a property that doesn't have a high amount of hunting pressure, I don't seem to find as much of those cluster rub bedding areas. And the reason is because this part, whenever you introduce a heavy amount of pressure, it shoves those bucks back into bedding for a lot of that daylight period activity, and they will still be daylight active. They'll get up, they'll move around their bed, they'll move a couple hundred yards throughout their bed throughout the middle of the day. But while they're doing that, they're just making rubs all over the place. So if you're hunting in a pressured area and you find one of these really dense, remote, off in the middle of nowhere locations that has these cluster rubs all over it, it's because there's quite a few bucks getting piled up into that spot due to all of the hunting pressure, and they're getting bored throughout the day. And they're just standing up and they're just hammering every single tree in the area because they would like to go do something, but if they do, they're going to go die. So they need to stay back and cover, and that's what they do. They just stand back, and oftentimes a lot of that breeding takes place back in bedding as well, from what I've seen. But one thing I was going to bring up as well, since we were talking about cluster rubs and bedding areas and things like that. Um, a few days ago, I was down in one of these areas, which I obviously this property that I was flying, I know where all the areas are because I've flown it for quite a long time. But this particular area was off. a little bit further, technically not on property I have access to, and then I had access to walk it and cruise around it. But a lot of deer were congregating down on kind of like a shelf right next to a creek where it shelves off, and there's just a ton of diverse habitat there. And down in it, I was just seeing a ridiculous amount of buck activity due to hunting pressure causing deer to congregate down at that lower level. And when I was walking down through there, I was counting just rubs everywhere. There weren't many scrapes, maybe two or three, but rubs in like every tree that you look direction you looked at, and oftentimes pretty big rubs. And then I stumbled across just like that much of an antler sticking out of the ground. And I didn't video it because when I saw it, I've seen this same thing before. You grab the little antler and you pull it out, and it's just a little shed that big. Pulled this one out, and it was about a 150-inch deadhead. And he was completely buried underneath the soil. So if you're ever out there and you find a bunch of cluster rubs, and then you find a 3, 4, I don't know how old this deadhead was. He looks like he's pretty old. Your old deadhead in that exact same spot as well. I think that's some pretty good historical sign. this spot this spot has been used and it is very popular.
No, that's a good point. Maybe something that I overlooked in my answer, like that. But similar, I guess, in the sense that it's like that's annual sign, like not necessarily, in which I guess was your question, historical sign. It's like annual, historical, maybe just the same thing. But when you see that repetitive buck sign, like year in and year out, it's just confirming that like the spot is so good that no matter what those other variables get thrown into the mix, they're still going to be here. Like they're still going to go down into that particular low spot or that high spot or that, mid slope bench or whatever it may be. And I think like sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the spots that don't have that, but really if you can be mobile enough when you're learning an area, like maybe that's just off season and you're just hunting a 100-acre parcel or something, but like that's why it's so important, I think, to learn areas and cover the ground, is because like you could just barely be off, but you're like in the cover type that they don't really want to spend that much time in, and maybe they come through it, but maybe it's not optimal time for you to intercept them. And I just think that the more ground you can cover, the better chances you get to finding those different spots. And like, when you talk about these timber areas too, like one thing that just is, it's like historical sign, I still think has like a bit of a window. Like I do think there's, I guess I haven't like lived maybe enough life to be speaking on this yet, but it seems like, you take a disturbance, for example, like a cut. There's kind of maybe a little bit of time where the deer are using it in one way. Like maybe they're just going and feeding on the fresh tops. Like that's the immediate response to that disturbance. And then, maybe a couple of years down the road, there's kind of that perfect level of regrowth where there's like grassy or brushy or just high stem count cover. Now maybe they're using that more as a bedding area. Maybe somewhere in between there's like a perfect amount of browse and bedding cover. But then there's also this certain point down the road where maybe that's 5, 10, or maybe it's not 5, but 10, 20, 30. Like at some point trees become trees again, and that,
Yeah, oftentimes 10 around that range.
one thing I spend a lot of time doing is like looking at historical aerial images and just relating that to like what we're seeing now. So for example, if there's a cut that I know of, or like you can be looking again anywhere in the country, and sometimes the Forest Service has that marked like on X what year certain cuts had taken place. So you might be able to go look at a historic image and say, oh, like this is what the cut looked like 5 years after it happened. This is what it looked like 10 years after. Now that it's been 20 years, I know how they're using it, now 20, 25 years after the fact or whatever. Now you can kind of like anticipate what this cut that's just happening now is going to look like, down that timeline as well. And I don't know, it's interesting to me. And like, I don't necessarily think I have any sort of good answer at all personally of like what the timeline is and how long that is going to stay good in a place that they're going to use, but then it could change and be worse. It could change and be better. You know, that's just part of like why I think it's so important to just keep spending time out there and continue to revisit these areas. Cause all of a sudden, I mean, this happens to us all the time. We go to a spot, it was really good at one point, and maybe even the next year we go there, it's not as good. And we're like, we kind of lose interest. And all of a sudden you go back 5 years later and it's like, hold on, they're here still. Like they probably were, you know, maybe just that 1 year after there was a factor that kind of pushed them slightly off the X, but now all of a sudden they're right back there. And I just think that's like one of the coolest things to me. It's like leave a spot for years and then just like slide in there like you know exactly what's going on and you are right. Doesn't happen very often, but when you are, it's like sweet. But anyway,
Yeah, what I've seen, probably one of the largest determining factors to any of that is drought conditions or not in over the summertime, because last season to this season on almost every property that I studied in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, um, we had really good rain last season. We had really high acorn production everywhere that I was at, and some of the areas in Arkansas still received that rain, and they had really good acorn production as well. And the way that their deer moved last season to this season hardly changed. Really similar. On the areas where they were drought ridden, like my area, specifically where I live, um, absolutely changed the way deer behaved. I mean, deer numbers just in general last season, there were probably almost 2 times as many deer just on the property in general, consistently browsing and lingering around. And there were across 3,000 acres that I was researching, there was around 10 to 15 mature bucks constantly moving through. This year on the same exact property, only thing that really has changed. Actually, we put in food plots on it for that was for a research project, and they turned out pretty well. So you thought, we provided supplemental food on an acorn drought season, and no, it didn't help. There's like 3 mature bucks on the property this season, and then now we go back to next season. Maybe we'll have acorns again, and I'd like to think that all those numbers are going to shift back again. And seeing that kind of ebb and flow of things change dependent upon where the available forage is, depending on the season, is really important as well. And I've even seen that like on an ag property I was studying during the drought. There was normally they planted like 120 to 200 acres of crops. And this specific season, there was only one 20-acre soybean field that performed well. And that one 20-acre soybean field was having 200 plus deer in it every single evening. And then the soybeans ended up getting cut down, and there were hardly any deer in that area, just in general, very shortly after, because they spread out. I mean, there was no forage anywhere in that area anymore. So, and now there's rye back in the locations. There's quite a few deer back on it, but still, it was just kind of fascinating to see that shift constantly changing in these areas.
do you think when you see something like that, like deer numbers go up and down, like how much of that, I mean, I have an opinion on it, but how much of that do you think is like, I'm trying to think of how exactly to say this. Maybe just simply the fact that they can move more than what we sometimes feel like they can move because, or can get hyper focused in one area based off of the resources that given year. Like, I think sometimes it's easy for us to just be like, oh, the deer, hmm. Not to say that you're saying it like this. The deer numbers are down. It's like the deer numbers that we're seeing, but it's like maybe just like 3 miles down the road. Now they're a little bit more focused in that area or they're spread out. Like, how much of it do you think is just out of those 15 bucks that they died, or how much of it do you think is that they just moved?
I think it's 100% that they just moved. Yeah, and I don't think hardly any of them died, or I probably would have heard about it because I've tried to get to know a lot. But at the same time, a deer can completely relocate his area 15 miles in one direction. He's oftentimes who's to say that he's going to move a half mile to one spot? And then the flip side of that confuses me is I always go back to that one deer that I mentioned earlier that was living on that small 30-acre clear cut, and it's really fascinating to me that a deer like that could become comfortable living in such a small, crappy location. Obviously, where he was living, the 30 acres, there was quite a bit of native forbs and a lot of stuff for him to browse on. And then he had the cattle pastures around him that he was going out and browsing on at nighttime. But at any moment, whenever darkness settled in at night, he could have just got up and walked a mile and a half one direction, and he would have been in a big patch of timber. And like, why would you not head to better habitat if you? But he just got complacent and he stayed in that area. So it gets back to the individualistic style of some bucks. Some bucks they really become complacent in that. They just want to stay in that small area, and it's like, no, this is my home. I'm very comfortable here. Conditions are not like I stay in this spot. And then you have some deer that, oh, that, everything changes it. No, I'm out. I'm bouncing to the complete different area. And maybe some of that shifts with does as well, because you see the same, not just in mature bucks. Like, I referenced mature bucks 15-3 or whatever earlier, but you see doe numbers on this specific area this season with the drought down significantly. And I know for a fact that nobody slung an arrow through 150 does this season. So they went somewhere. They displaced themselves and went to a new location. And I think that in the summertime and late September, that time frame, we'll start seeing all of those. I'll be able to see those deer again with the drone really easily, and they'll be back in the area. But if the conditions don't allow for it, as season goes on, forbs start dropping, acorns aren't there all of a sudden, then I think it'll displace them again. They'll be displaced. But typically after a year like this, where you have 0 acorns, we're going to have some next season. So, but continuing to pay attention to that, what's the available food in the area, and how that's causing deer to shift from location to location. And oftentimes they're not doing what we said, alluded to before. They're all dying, or maybe they died to EHD, or there's a lot of hunting hunters that are thwacking them. Oftentimes they're displacing them. They're moving to a different location.
Well, so actually, that was kind of the EHD topic was actually, I was headed kind of in that direction. So my buddy Keith but buddies Ben and Keith, like they live in an area that, one of the areas that we frequent, and it's like that particular location or like those certain areas around pretty localized got hit really hard with EHD this year. And I know I was talking with Keith at one point about it, and he was talking about like one specific place and talking about how the year prior there was a bunch of bucks around, and he was excited about it, and he was really, the last couple of years, has had no problem finding a mature buck in that area. And then all of a sudden this year, EHD hits, kills a ton of deer in the area, and finding a mature buck like just wasn't really something, like definitely wasn't consistent like it had been. And like I could tell that was like a bummer for him, as it would be anybody, right? But thinking about it and like not just blowing smoke and telling him something just because this is maybe like gonna make him feel better, I got to kind of thinking about it, and I was like, dude, like if that was an entire like region, like an entire state or multiple states or whatever, that was just hammered and like literally all the deer died, versus it being very localized and being, a couple certain tributaries and branches off of those, water sources that are maybe like you can kind of map out where that disease struck. That's a lot different than, them getting wiped out completely and like big scale regionally, because this is my theory. Because he said something along the lines of like, hopefully in a couple of years, it'll be back. It's like, dude, I bet you there's a good chance that within even a year, you think about an entire 12 months, like we think about deer and we think about, maybe September till about January, or maybe, give or take a few months or whatever, depending on where you're at. But we're talking 12 months out of a year. These deer have complete free range to move wherever they want. So sure, maybe locally they all, got hit pretty hard and a lot of them died. These areas that are right next door that didn't get hit with that probably still have like an overabundance of deer, which is pretty common for a lot of the country. Those deer, in my opinion, within the next however many months till season opens back up, are probably just going to slowly start finding those little pockets where they're going to show up and they're going to be like, that's a pretty good spot. Where's everybody at? I guess this is where I live now. And then all of a sudden, same thing, like you're just kind of redistributing all this population of deer, and like maybe what would even be more fascinating is to see places next door to those high impact areas that were hit with the EHD, how their deer population changes the following year. Like that would be worth, you know, taking note of, just because who knows, maybe that would be a noticeable difference. Maybe it wouldn't be at all. Maybe everywhere would feel all of a sudden like there's deer coming from every which direction. But like, I think there's enough studies done now, stuff you're doing, stuff that MSU is doing, like where we see these, or even just with enough trail cameras these days, where it's like, man, this buck went 15 miles within season, that it's like, maybe that's actually not as uncommon as like,
I bet it is pretty common. I mean, a lot of times, uh, in fact, very rarely do I record a buck that he stays in my area the entire time. And a lot of time, people kind of think on a managed property, which when I say managed property, that no offense, completely wild. There's public all around it. Like this is very much so. Everywhere I research is open. Why would you freaking research a high fence property? Anyways,
right.
I would prefer it to have hunting pressure. There are areas that I've researched that have no hunting pressure just to see what they're like. But anyways, moral of the story is that rarely do I start recording a buck at the beginning of season and I have him at the end of the season. Extremely rare. Uh, in fact, in the 2 years I've done it now, and just in my hunting experience, I know of, in my life, I probably know of 5 deer that have stayed in this area that I've kind of been able to hunt a lot throughout my life, and then I've researched, and then since I've been flying the drone, I know of 2 that have stayed, and really stayed is kind of a hard term because the first year one, he would bounce away for a day and then he would come back and he'd bounce away for a day and he was constantly traveling over a mile every single day. And in some cases I could track his entire mile to mile and a half to 2.5 mile days. I could track the whole day out because I had access to all of that area that he was traveling. Some days he'd go in a completely freaking different direction and I would lose him and I couldn't track him, so I don't know where he's at. He'd be gone for a day or two and come back and he's back. I can keep researching him again. But in the end, I still was able to find him all the way until, late January. And that buck in particular, actually, I was trying to replicate, or I was trying to do the same thing that I replicated this year, where I wanted to study him shedding his antlers. I wanted to record the whole process. I wanted to see him actually start getting annoyed by them, shaking his head, scratching his pedestal. I wanted to see the whole process, and I wasn't able to do that with him because me and my wife had left town for a couple of days, and whenever we came back on January 25th, he was gone. Never found him again. And this year, I never found him again this year as well. So, like, he stayed all season, but then he was gone, and now I have no idea where he's at. I have no closure on that either. So that's where a GPS collar is really cool. So you can continue to see and figure out that portion of the story. So combining thermal drones and GPS collars would be really cool someday. But then on, I'm getting a phone call. Then on, here's my dad. Leave me alone, Dad. The 10 that I was researching this year, I tracked him. Actually, we had him in the summertime, and then I lost him from the whole month of September, most of October, and then I found him in October in kind of the same area we'd initially seen him. I was like, oh, okay, like that's got him now. And then I studied him all season long in that general area. He had one area that he preferred, and I was able to record him. I didn't get the whole shedding process, but I was able to record him getting aggravated at his antlers like I wanted to, shaking his head, taking all of his energy out on other bucks in the area, scratching around his antlers, raking them on trees, things like that, which was actually pretty abusive to me mentally because once he lost one antler, then I'm watching him rake and just batter this other antler trying to get rid of it. And it's like, please drop the antler. I want to know, like, I want to get the antler, but he never did on camera. I ended up finding it though in the end, but still, more of the story is that deer. Like I had him, and then I lost him, and I had him again. So he was definitely he had a wider range, and I think that hunting pressure or human pressure just in general is what caused him to condense that range. He became really comfortable probably in the summertime with this larger home range, And then as bow hunters and everything started cropping up around his core area, he just slowly shrunk that core area, and he became complacent with it. He liked that core area and he never left it. Whereas some deer, they might just up and leave it one day and be gone. Because one of the other deer I researched this season, I researched him for half of the season, and he spent most of his time in around a 300 to 500 acre block of timber. That was what I'd call his core area. He would bounce out of it every once in a while. It was pretty rare. And then as hunting pressure increased, he shrunk his home range to like 120 acres or less. It was really, really short, really small. And then I recorded him, and then one day he was out browsing, and he browsed all day long from sun up to sundown. And then the next morning I came back to locate him, and he was gone, completely gone. And everyone in the area that I was contacting, neighbors, trail cams, anything, nobody had pictures. He was gone, just 100%. And in my if he would have just up and died, I would have been able to find him because his thermal signature would have still been there. So he did genuinely up and just leave, unless he got hit by a car and they just dragged him up and back there. Yeah, once again, another great situation where if I had a GPS collar, that would have been really cool, so I could know how far he traveled out from there. But all I can really walk away with is yes, they will leave an area, and even a very large comfortable block of an area that it receives hunting pressure, but it's pretty mild hunting. I would call it hunting pressure. Well, hunting presence, not so much hunting pressure. John Eberhardt's kind of put me onto that differentiation, because hunting pressure is whenever people are actually constantly killing deer, which happens a lot during rifle season, but not many people are putting true hunting pressure during archery. They're kind of there's a hunting presence. They're there, but they're not slinging arrows through every deer that walks by. So
Do you
yeah.
want to be the pressure or do you want to be the presence?
Yeah, you want to be the pressure thing. Last I heard.
So
Yeah.
one question that kind of comes up from that, and I mean, there's tons of them, tons of different ideas that come from this, but it's like, how consistent are you seeing like specific bucks using areas like during the same times of the year? Like, for example, if one of these bucks shows up, is it often that he's doing it like his appearance and disappearance kind of align with what he was doing last year, or is that something that you feel like you still need more time to study to answer?
Yeah, for that, I mean, specific, I would need more time to answer. In terms of deer utilizing the same areas at similar times of year, I see that, but oftentimes the way that a lot of the habitats that I've researched are laid out, they spend all their a lot of their summertime, their pre-rut, rut, all post-rut, everything. They spend a lot of their time, bedding time at least, in those core bedding areas in general. And a lot of times those core bedding areas on most of the properties that I've researched, they could be 10 acres in some cases in size, and they'll just plop down within that 10-acre section of a bedding area. And sometimes it makes a little bit of sense as to why they're in one, side or the other. Like maybe they can get a better visual, or maybe they're denser in cover on the backside potentially. But for the most part, it generally doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason. It's just they made it back to that bedding area and they plopped back down. And the repetitiveness of that I've seen, but the repetitiveness of the same mature buck to a year by year basis, actually, in the 2 years I've been doing it, uh, all of the bucks that I researched last season, none of them were back this season. Not a single one of them. So all of the bucks that I researched this season on every property that I researched, on both, none of them are the same, which is kind of weird actually, because in the past, is someone who's hunted a couple of those properties, like that buck right there, he he was on the property for 6 7 years. Everyone knew who he was. I was a kid and I was the one that was able to get him killed. And uh so like there's been a history of bucks staying year to year to year very consistently. But in the 2 years I've researched, and they were drastically different years for a lot of the areas, then I wasn't seeing the same bucks. And actually, even on the northern Arkansas areas that still received rain that I was researching, where their deer numbers were similar on the year by year basis, they weren't retaining the same bucks at the times that I was flying, which was pretty interesting.
Oh, it's so fascinating. I mean, like, just a theory that pops into my mind is like, could it be as simple as like they just don't like the individuals that are there currently? Like, could that also be an additional factor? Because, like, for example, you're saying 15 bucks, mature bucks last year, 3 this year. Well, there's still 3 that are using it, so there's still enough resources that some of them that are there. But the fact that it's 3 different ones than the 15 from before, or maybe that's not even totally accurate, but like, or is that accurate?
That was accurate. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, could it just be simply that these 3 bucks and these other bucks out of this 15, maybe they just don't like each other, and it's like, okay, now that these 3 have moved in or that these have moved out, it gives different opportunities for bucks, just like people. I mean, for example, you might have a job where you're like, man, the people that I work with over here, like, this is brutal. You go do like the same exact job at a different place, different building, all of a sudden you're around the right people. You're like, oh, I'm doing the same day to day stuff, but now I'm just enjoying this way more just because I like who I'm around. I wonder if that could be a factor that, well, I mean, I don't know how we would ever learn that in
I
full,
think it
but
could be because, like, and by the way, while you were saying that, I was thinking through racking all the deer that I've researched in my brain, and I remembered one is the 6x6. I forget what his number is in my research sheet, but I've had him ever since he was year and a half old. I mean, you could see that he was different whenever he was a wee little baby on trail camera, and he's just this little tiny 6x6 hanging around, and he stayed as a 6x6 his whole life. We've had him forever, but he was the deer that up and vanished on, it was like November 2nd. I don't remember what, early November, and yeah, he browsed all day long and then disappeared all of a sudden. And so I don't really know what to think of that one because I've seen him stay to the late season in the past. But as to that, do they potentially just not like a group of individuals that they're hanging around? I think there could be something to that because the one buck that I was researching last season the most, the I named him Winter. He was a prick. Like he was an absolute jerk. You've seen some of those deer where every deer they walk by, they raise their foot and stomp it down, or they're constantly pinning their ears back anytime anyone enters their bubble, and
I
that was
like
his
those ones.
demeanor. Yeah, I know they're my favorite. It's really hard for him specifically. He was such a trophy animal. He was a very high scoring deer that I wasn't obsessive about wanting to like hunt that deer. But whenever I see a deer like that with that demeanor, that's just kind of like a massy 115 to 125 inch eight,
Oh
I get
yeah.
excited. Yeah, I want to go hunt those deer. But I've said that before, but I'll continue saying it. They are my favorite deer. Um, but that one, I've seen him walk up next to other mature bucks, and those other mature bucks, they just tuck their tails and bounce around him. And he had a terrible limp. I mean, I've talked about that deer so much, but it was such a fascinating thing to see a deer that he was clearly mature, and he was walking amongst other mature bucks that were oftentimes bigger than him body wise because he was wounded and he traveled so much every day that he was depleted of energy stores. Yeah, he had nowhere near the body mass, and but he had bigger antlers, which I don't know how much that plays into their visual demeanor. It's like that guy's got big biceps. I don't want to fight him, but in reality, he just lifts a lot of weights and he's weak as all get out. Where that falls in line. But this deer, I don't think he was weak. He was probably bad to the bone, and every other deer had an experience with him. It's like, gosh, I freaking hate this deer when he walks around. And maybe that caused them to potentially relocate once, not that they know when season ends, but once summer and everything kind of settled in and they bachelored up, the groups themselves, those bachelor groups, relocated an area because it's like, we're getting away from this freaking douchebag. Like, we're done hanging around him. That could be a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you saying that you believe that he was bad to the bone. I mean, I think that's a real thing. Like, I think that certain bucks are just flat out mean, and I mean, you could relate that back to people, like you said. I mean, there's certain people that you can just look at and you're like, "Ooh, yeah, that," or like, I relate a lot of things to sports. It's like, depending on what sport you're talking about, it's like there's definitely some advantage to having that, kind of chip on your shoulder, I guess. And like some bucks just have that chip on their shoulder. Like they're like, you're not gonna mess with me, and even if you do, I'm gonna literally die trying to prove you wrong. And I think that that type of attitude like doesn't always allow for them to live that awful long. Like I think sometimes those younger bucks that are like flat out mean get themselves in trouble because they're more susceptible to calls. They're more likely to like just make some instinctive decision that like in the heat of the moment they think is the right decision, but then all of a sudden they're running out into the road and getting hit by a car. It's like maybe more. I mean, you start talking about the personalities of deer, and some people don't like to give them personalities, but I think that's like also unfair to like how cool they really are. Like, I mean, I just I mean, this is cliche. It sounds cheesy as I start to say it, but it's like you got to respect the things. Like they are the true like wizards of the woods. Like they're so good at what they do, and every decision that they make, up to a certain, like once they hit a certain age, like they've essentially made the right decisions or got a little bit of luck on their side, I'm sure too, but they've made all the right decisions that far throughout their life that like pretty much everybody else doesn't even make it to that age. Like that's impressive. And I mean, sometimes that's not that is sometimes that is a 2.5-year-old buck. Sometimes it's a 3.5-year-old buck or like more or less your top tier of the age class that have made it and survived that long. But it's like I guess point being is like when you start to really look at the individual aspect of it, it's just I mean the opportunities are endless for like what they could do and how their behavior could change. And you know like one thing for example that I think is pretty telltale, like broken tine bucks. Broken tine bucks are that mean. They are that mean buck, like Buddy Winter. Like they are almost 100% more likely to come into a call, in my experience, than the ones that don't have broken tines. Like, I mean, I can remember this one buck one time. I filmed Greg shoot it back in 2015, which is crazy. Been 10 years, but this buck's cruising. We had just hung a tree stand. Got up there, looked down. It's like, hey, there's a buck cruising. Greg grunts to him. The thing literally turns, looks up towards us, and runs to the base of the tree. And he shoots him at like, super close range. Broken tine buck. Like, not the biggest bodied deer, even, like actually relatively small. But man, he heard that. And at the time of the year when you start to hit that point where like some bucks will indicate that the rut is, over, which I think is, I could talk about that topic for forever, but they're giving you those clues that like, their body's starting to get small. They're seeing other deer, they're seeing those and they're not even necessarily going over there because they're just like, you can tell they're kind of skittish and intimidated because they probably got their rear end stabbed a couple times by somebody that's tougher than them. It was hitting that point in the season where that starts to kind of happen, late November. But by golly, that broken tine buck, he heard that grunt and he took off running to it. I mean, and that was in Iowa where like almost certainly there's bucks that he's encountered that like, visually have every indicator that would tell you that they're going to just absolutely demolish him. But like, man, he came in running. I mean, I'll never forget how quick of a reaction that was. And again, the very next buck, same age or whatever, might act totally different than that, might run the other way. And I just think you see that in deer, you see it in elk, you see it in turkeys. I mean, you definitely see it in turkeys. It's also something that, people don't necessarily talk about that often, but turkey will do the same exact thing. I mean, all of a sudden he's been bumped around 3 or 4 times and got in a fight and lost. And all of a sudden he's like, I'm not going where any other turkeys are making sounds. Like, going the other way. I think deer will do the same, elk, whatever, but it all plays back into that personality. And I think there are probably personalities that are probably more in favor of us as hunters. And I think the mean one is one. Also, I just think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree because I think the meanest buck that I've ever seen, I think we saw him in person more often than not. It was on an ag property where you could see forever, and therefore ag property in southern Missouri, which is really rare. And he had a broken G2, but he broke it in velvet. So it was one of those where it kind of balled up and then it jetted off to one side and then it grew his G2 up again, maybe 6 inches off of that. So he had been broken off in velvet. He may have had like a knob at the tip of one of his other tines where he broke off in velvet again. And then the tip of his main beam was just completely sheared off. And it's like this dude, and he had this squared off big Roman nose and just a freaking bad looking deer. And it's like he could take on anything, and no one ended up killing that deer. But I think he was he made himself really vulnerable a lot. And then the same thing with Winter from that season. I've all of the bucks that I'd researched, not just on that main property, but on all of the properties. I think he was the easiest buck to kill if anyone wanted to try to hunt in a little bit of a better style. And in his case, not many people were hunting in that great of style. They were going and sitting in towers and on field edges. But if anyone had just stepped foot in the woods and set up with a decent wind more than 3 days that season, you would have killed him. He would have been dead because he was just all over the map on that property every single day, making himself very vulnerable all the time. Whereas you get some of these other bucks that like the tight home ranges, getting in on their tight home range can be really difficult. Like, yeah, you know where they bed and you know where they kind of like to feed, but they're so much more dialed into their home range, their area, that getting into it is a lot more difficult in that case. So finding if you can identify a buck that's more aggressive, then yeah, he's going to be easier to hunt in most cases.
So here's something though that pops into my mind. It's just like it's going to be endless here, but I'll probably have to wrap up here soon.
Yeah,
But
yeah, you have to leave, I
um,
think.
yeah, but the question then that kind of created in my head is okay. So if Winter Buck is doing all these movements in daylight, but he's in places that people aren't hunting. But he's around where people are hunting, like again, the hunting presence versus the pressure. So like I have this belief, and this goes with permanent stand sites, and this is public private, and things like trail cameras, or even as simple as like leaving your sticks in the woods. Like I don't necessarily mean like a whole setup or a ladder stand or something that's visually obvious. I mean, talking sticks on a tree or even screw in pegs potentially. Do you think that a buck like Winter, who is making these moves that to somebody watching on the outside who would be loving to get in there and hunt in this aggressive style or more aggressive style or just even out of the ordinary, do you think that he could have just straight up patterned the typical hunting movements so well that he's like, I know in this area, I'm good. Like, I know if I just stay in the cover versus go out into that opening, the field or the pasture or, whatever it may be, I guess, in that situation to make him more obvious and visible to those hunters doing the, kind of the repetitive style of hunts. Like, could he just know that he is safe in that situation? Where maybe if he moved to the neighboring block, maybe he wouldn't act that same exact way. Now, I guess the reason I mentioned those gear items, and this kind of goes back to your one scrape example where you saw the nose stick in. I guess over the years, I've become a pretty firm believer that when you leave stuff out there, and this kind of like goes even back to the ground hunting thing, when you leave stuff out there, whether it's a trail camera, sticks in the tree, ladder stand, whatever it may be, what would tell you that they don't pick up on that? I mean, they smell where our boot touched the dang ground 2 days ago. Sometimes it feels like they can get every little detail of scent. Why wouldn't they smell our presence and the things that we leave? So, for example, Buck Winter is walking around and he's a 2-year-old and he's walking around that field edge and it's at night and somebody, 3 weeks before season went and hung a new tree stand or put up a new tower blind on the edge of that field. It's dark. He's good. He's cruising around though, and all of a sudden, boom, ooh, human scent. Oh, new item. Okay, I'm safe. I'm not getting shot at. What? To be honest, do we even know the difference if they know that they're safe in the dark. Like, is he standing there in the dark looking at it, kind of thinking, ooh, I need to get out of here. So he gets out of there. Okay. He's safe, but he's like, I smelled the human presence. I saw this new thing that's there that wasn't there yesterday. Maybe that's a trail camera. I don't know why, but like, it's just so common for folks to just be like, yeah, no chance that affects him at all. It's like,
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a chance, or not even a chance. I know for a fact that they recognize they're safer at nighttime. You can see that with their feeding behavior in native forb fields that are fully exposed to human presence, whether it's roads, houses, etc. Daytime, desolate areas if they're exposed. Nighttime, they can be wherever the heck they want to. They don't care. They will walk wherever they want to because they realize they're safe under cover at night. They also recognize that human presence at nighttime in that area, there's none. Now, if you started going out and spotlighting a field edge every single night, this one specific field that has 50 deer in it every night, I guarantee you within a couple of days they're going to recognize for whatever reason this field at nighttime it's not safe. And
yep.
we keep getting shot at, like something's happening. Johnny died and Carol died. Like we're not going back there. We're going somewhere else. So they can pick up on that. But and they recognize that nighttime's significantly more safe. But on the other side, the initial question was, can they pick? I think everything's related to human scent. So if you're going in and you're leaving your scent, whether it's a tree stand or a trail camera or a tower, and it's fresh within that range, and they pick up scent off of that specific item, and they're able to recognize that like that's kind of something out of the ordinary, then I think that is something that gets cataloged in their brain like, whoa, that wasn't, like, for reference, the buck that I had kind of intentionally gave him an opportunity to bump off of me moving the trail camera and leaving my scent. If I was to have a way to do that scentless, and he wasn't going to be able to pick up my scent in any way, shape, or form. I rubber gloved and I scent locked or whatever in the world you can do, sprayed myself with every compound possible, and I went into that specific camera and I moved it the correct way. Then I don't think he'd be bothered by the camera at that moment because it is something potentially new. Maybe he would pick up on that. A lot of them blend in semi well, but now with slapping solar panels and stuff, they start not blending in as well. But I don't think he would have picked up on it, and I think he would have continued to utilize the scrape. I guess that's something I need to try to do now is move a camera scentless and see if that has an impact. But yeah, no, I think for sure though, as long as they're able to pick up your scent on that exact item in that area, then I think it's something that gets cataloged. I don't know that it's something that they begin just fully avoiding at that moment in time. I think that it just makes them curious to that thing whenever they move back into that area. And you can see that with trail cameras that are placed in areas without bait. So you place a trail camera in an area 3 months ago, and that camera is facing this direction, and the deer are walking left to right every single time. First few days, a lot of the deer were kind of curious with the trail camera. They're checking it out because they picked up your human scent. And then in the future, whenever they're walking by that area, they're always turning back and checking out the camera because they remembered that something happened there, and I'm curious about it, but it's not killing me. It hasn't killed anyone, but they're still curious about it. And then now if you twist that and say it's a stand that they put in, and the deer was already preemptively curious about that stand, and they go in and maybe the hunter's hunting with a bad wind or the thermals are bad in that area, and he starts blowing out that location again, you're going to have a massive impact at that moment. And yeah, I had another point off of that. Another thing to it is that, like say Winter, you were saying Winter, whenever he's say 2.5 years old and he's bebopping through the same area, I think a lot of that, the way that they behave whenever they become more mature, 5, 6 years old, etc., is dependent upon what groups they're capable of getting bathrooed up with. I've seen for some reason, and it's probably due to density and the type of deer that are in the area, but sometimes like a 2.5-year-old, he'll get thrown in to the fire with a group of big dogs. And it's like, how are you in that group? But for whatever reason, you can pay attention to that 2.5-year-old and he keeps showing up in the future. And then here he is as a 6-year-old all of a sudden in a very heavily hunted area. And he was exposed to that style of survival that they had. Whereas if you have a buck that lives to be, say, 4 years old on his own, and he was never bachelored up with that group, and he continues to bachelor up with a lower tiered group, the 2.5-year-olds, he's never getting exposed to that same type of mentality with the big dogs. So I think there's something to that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and definitely something that, you know, we've talked about in some capacity amongst, different friend groups or whatever. It's like those big bucks, when when there's one or two of them, like let's say it's late season and you got two 4 or 5 year old bucks, and then you got one 2 or 3 year old buck, or two 2 or 3 year old bucks. It's like those guys that are, as long as they don't get killed being the bait, because like I do think that's a thing. Like mature bucks will be like, no, you go through that funnel first, and
Oh,
you
I
make sure
recorded it this year multiple times. Yeah.
I'm sure,
Yeah.
I'm sure. And then once y'all are out there, then I'll come out. And I think that definitely happens, but like they're learning that behavior as being the sucker that's bait, but like down the road, 2, 3 years down the road, they're going to end up taking that same role, and they're going to kind of understand those body language cues and everything. And like maybe they, like you said, maybe they just don't even get a chance to learn them when they're with different younger bucks. And I guess one thing I wanted that popped into my head, and we were talking about the scent on the ground and different gear items and everything, like something that, as I was explaining that and just we were going through that part of the conversation, that popped in my mind is, I wonder how many people have ever done this. Taking a permanent stand, like something that is in a really good spot, hung it, and I think a really good way to do it would be to hang it in like an entire like winter before. But like, what if you hung it and then like left it for, I don't know how this would be for safety necessarily, but like not just leave it for like a year, but what if you left it for like a few years, 2 years before you ever even hunted it, to where you let them get excuse me, so used to the visual of it being there that maybe they do smell it. Maybe they do take that note of it. Okay, we're looking at it every time we go past it, making sure there's nobody there. But then they hit a point where all of a sudden it's like, yeah, there's nothing wrong. Like that's just part of the woods. And I wonder how, I mean, that's something that you'd almost have to just run a test on, like an experiment to see how, they maybe behave differently around it, or eventually change their behavior around it. And like what made me think of it specifically is a stand that I found 5 years ago and that found again this year. It's like that stand hasn't changed. I'm sure it probably really isn't even getting hunted. It might just have been left there from maybe 10 years ago. But pretty fascinating, like to think, that stand, if nobody's hunting it, I'm sure there's a certain point in which they just stop paying any attention to it. Now,
Yeah.
going back to the short term, like one thing that I think is an advantage of hunting off the ground, but also hunting and moving your setup, like even if you are in a tree versus having a permanent stand, is you are catching them more off guard. Like even if they did smell you in that area, if you can slightly adjust your setup in certain situations, like maybe you feel like you didn't have that much of an impact and you want to go set up in the same exact spot. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I do that sometimes. But within an area, if you can just like move often, I think it just like keeps them on their toes so much that I kind of think of it as like, if they smell a coyote every time, or if they run away and leave the area every time they smell a coyote, they're never going to stay in the same place. So it can't just be like scent, it completely blows them out, like, or makes them avoid areas, like, especially when you're talking ground scent. I don't think they would just come up to your ground scent with no other gear left in the woods and just be like, I'm never coming back to this area. Because if that was the case, then every time they encountered a bear or a coyote or maybe even bobcat, maybe even, certain areas like mountain lions, like they would just totally leave constantly. But they don't necessarily always do that. Sometimes maybe they do.
Yeah, oftentimes from what I've seen with ground scent is, and they pick you up off of your ground scent, is that it's going to bump them away a few hundred yards, and they're going to get very comfortable again, and they're in even in some, well, there are other instances where they come across very fresh ground scent, and they become curious off of that, and they might do a little bit of they might do a little bit. I've never seen one follow it, but they'll do a little bit of inspecting still. They'll kind of move around in that area for a second and inspect the area. And oftentimes they will leave it a little bit skittish, but they'll get comfortable again. And then within a few hours, they'll be back through that same area and they'll further inspect it, maybe under the cover of darkness. And then once they realize like coast is clear, yeah, they're fine. But now if you started going in, I haven't tested this because I don't want to disturb an area this heavily, but if you started going in and just walking the same trail every single day, or maybe 5 days a week or 4 days a week, then I think you're going to start having an impact because the deer is going to continue to walk through his home. And it's like there's human scent here every single time. I've never seen the human, but there's always human scent here every single time. Like something's that they probably heard you, by the way, is in that essence. Like you're walking through their little range, they're going to hear you or see you, or something will have happened. I would assume, but still, yet if you start disturbing it to that ratio, then I think yeah, you would start to have an effect. In my opinion, like hanging, I've always thought hanging a permanent stand. I've always liked the idea of hanging a permanent stand like right now, like starting as soon as season ends for your area, and you're going out and shed hunting or preparing for turkey or whatever you're doing. Like now is a really good time to hang those permanent stands. And for me, I generally only ever hunt permanent stands like once or twice a year. That's kind of been my thing, and a couple other guys that I know. We've always liked the idea of using them once or twice, setting them in really high risk locations where there's a chance that the wind might not work for you or something to that ratio, and you might mess things up. But you're going to move in and you're going to hunt it once or twice, and if you disturb the deer, you're out. Like you're not going to. So on a managed property setting where you are capable of putting up long-term stands and leaving them, then in that case you're going to move in. Maybe you'll make a mistake. If you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world because you're only in there once. But if you set up that stand and it's like one of your two only stands that you have, and you're going and banging down that stand every single time and blowing deer once or twice a week, then you're going to have a massive impact.
I think, man, that's just there's so many things that well, I bet we could talk for several years. Um, I think the thing though, like with the trail, I'd also think there's another like tipping point the other way where if it's frequently used enough that they start to realize like in the right, like for example, if your grandma's walking the dog down the trail every day, that's totally different than you walking in and trying to be sneaky. Like I think there's a difference even between like, and I think this is a pretty like a fairly common uh, way of thinking. Like farm equipment, for example, is one people talk about a lot. Like out there, you know, planting a field or combining a field or whatever, deer are comfortable with that because that usually doesn't mean danger. Same thing with like walking down a trail or like a hiking trail, popular spots that people frequent. It's like deer get almost so used to that that they're like able to differentiate that human activity similarly to what we were talking about way back at the beginning of the conversation, like close to houses where people aren't hunting. Just like they can almost differentiate that human activity, um, just like they can like a busy road that's may seem like it's too much a human activity, but they're just like, nah, we're good with that. We know that's not danger. It's never been danger yet.
We are at the time that you need to leave, or we've lapsed. So, well, Zach, it was great having you on, and we'll probably have you on again so that way we can talk theories and dream ideas that come up. And yeah, so thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to ramble about the things that I think about. It's been a great outlet for that.
Yeah,
It's been a
anytime,
great
man.
time.